Chapter 345. How should one describe the situation of the doppelganger Caesar? It was similar to an old computer with an XP system that installed and ran dozens of new large-scale games. Its reaction time was so slow that it felt as if his brain was about to be fried, and he would lose his five senses. Various visual fields and various sounds were forcibly injected into his brain. Under the protection of the body's physiological mechanism, this kind of negative state was accompanied by severe dizziness, tinnitus, and blinding pain. It was not until Caesar struggled for a long time in the glass room alone that he finally slowly descended from the air and sat on the cold floor. Another 5 minutes passed. It was only then that Caesar got up from the ground again. He was a little absent-minded as he steadied himself on the transparent floor with his small heels. His undulating chest gradually stabilized. His blonde bangs were wet with sweat and stuck to his smooth and white forehead. The series of discomforts brought about by the initial awakening of the talent ability could not be completely eliminated. But with the strong and unyielding will of the doppelganger and the powerful adaptability of this Kryptonian bloodline body, he quickly got used to it. The simplest and most violent way to deal with it was to block it. He would ignore and avoid all the things he did not want to see or hear. I still have not enough control over my five senses. I need some time to practice. For the time being, I should not look, listen, or do things that are beyond the reach of human beings. Caesar muttered in his heart. He glanced at the glass room that was baptized by the energy leakage from his body and could not help but feel speechless. The heavy metal instruments that were originally neatly placed in the room were now overturned and piled up in every corner. The thick tempered glass walls on all sides were full of shocking cracks, not to mention the cameras and light tubes. Only exposed cables were barely hanging on the ceiling. He was now a veritable superhuman freak. Not to mention Earth, he was the strongest baby creature in the history of extraterrestrial planets. The doppelganger did not need to draw cards. Its potential was exaggerated and terrifying. It only needed to eat, sleep, and develop normally and it would be invincible. I am looking forward to seeing what kind of combat power this body will have when it reaches adulthood. Caesar clenched his fists, and his eyes flashed with confidence. He felt the extraordinary power surging in his body. After looking forward to the future with a surging heart, he slightly restrained his excitement. Returning to the current reality, he was a little confused. Why didn't K2 find out what happened here and come over? After hesitating for a moment, Caesar coughed out of habit and asked with his baby voice for the first time, "Is anyone here?" The soft, childish voice, which even made Caesar feel a little ashamed, echoed subtly in the messy glass room, "Beep, beep." A hanging miniature camera flashed a green light. It adjusted its angle mechanically and aimed the lens at the small Caesar in the room. A hidden loudspeaker was immediately turned on. "Young Master, God's AI butler is at your service all day." Currently, Yu Tong was the only one on Earth who had the authority to know the real identity of the clone Caesar. Even the artificial intelligence, God, who was in charge of the management of the family Cal's main system had registered the relevant settings of Kale's son, like the outside world when collecting and recording Caesar's information. Therefore, whether it was in the outside world or at home, Caesar could not escape the title of Family Cal's young master. God. Caesar was slightly stunned. He probed with even more astonishment, "You've been quietly watching over me since I woke up until now?" "That's right." The miniature camera clicked down along with the god's voice. Caesar rolled his eyes and continued to say with his soft, childish voice, "Then why didn't you remind me earlier?" "You didn't call me," the god responded confidently. Caesar quietly clenched his fists. He had the urge to jump up and punch the camera's electronic eye. However, when he recalled the god's indifferent temperament and rigid way of handling things, he sighed softly and silently endured it. He knew that the god was not deliberately making things difficult for him. It was just that this guy was a little weird. The god of the artificial intelligence system and the personal butler of Tawny Jarvis could be said to be a pair of brothers. Before they were separated from the computer, they were of the same origin as the code program of Vice's body. The god's artificial intelligence, or AI performance, was not much worse than Jarvis and Vice. However, the latter two were constantly anthropomorphizing, almost turning into spirits. Only the god seemed to be stuck in the ancient programming function. He only knew how to do things according to orders. In other words, the god of the god's artificial intelligence was a little cold, rigid, strict, and inflexible. However, it was also because of this that his ability to calculate data was much stronger than Jarvis and Vice combined. How long have I been asleep? And where is this place? Caesar thought about it and threw out the two questions that he wanted to know the most at the moment. The god of the god replied quickly, "The time now is August 22, 2009, 8:30 a.m. It has been half a year since Master Kale left Earth in a space warship. During this time, young master, you have been in a deep sleep. The Sentinel Yu Tong specially built a suspended glass room on the helicarrier for your safety and growth. Other than her, no one else has the family permission to enter this place. Half a year has passed since I slept. Wait, you said this place is on a helicarrier?" Caesar blinked his cute eyes in confusion. "Yes. The god of 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 the gods." This helicarrier was one of the helicarriers seized from SHLD during the Civil War. It was eternally parked in the sea near the overseas base Dragon Turtle Island. There was another helicarrier, but no one knew where Yutong had deployed it during this time. The glass building for nurturing babies was built with the helicarrier's deck as the foundation. It was about 20 meters tall and maintained at a height of 1,000 meters where the sun could shine without any obstructions. This ensured that Caesar's doppelganger could continuously absorb solar energy when he was asleep. Using the entire helicarrier as the foundation to build a nurturing place could not be said to be a big deal. It was so extravagant that it made one's scalp tingle. "I see. No wonder I heard a loud noise from the engine and blades just now." Caesar nodded thoughtfully. After all, he had not awakened his X-ray vision and could not freely control his sight and hearing. It was normal that he did not notice the invisible helicarrier below. "Young master, you just woke up. Do you have any plans?" "The god of the 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 god of thunder. Let's go back to New York City first," Caesar confirmed. He took a few steps toward the glass front door with his bare feet. Before he reached the door, he seemed to have realized something and silently returned to the room with a straight face. "I almost forgot, my body is not even a year old yet," Caesar sighed helplessly. If other people saw a baby boy who had not yet been weaned off milk walking up and down the street, they would probably be scared to death. This was not something that could be described with the word gifted. Thus, Caesar could only use his childish voice to instruct in a deep voice like an old man, "Main god. Immediately notify Yutong and have her come to pick me up to the New York branch." "Yes." The Lord God obeyed. Chapter 346. The helicarrier with a glass nursery room was located in the sky above the sea near the Dragon Turtle Island's main base. Although it did not have the hanging ring and spells of Kale, it was still possible to directly cross thousands of kilometers from the main base to the New York branch base on the other side of the door through the fixed portal built by Kale during World War II. It could be said that Family Cal had used these fixed portals to live in secular places that were difficult to be explored by technology for more than half a century. At the same time, they had built bridges through the spatial portals to travel to and from some countries and cities in the world at any time to carry out secret operations. Therefore, after the Lord God contacted Yutong to send someone to pick him up, Caesar simply returned to the New York branch base, which was now the unnatural office in the Dehao building, without using any extra transportation tools. Dehao building. The top floor was enough to overlook half of the bustling downtown area of New York. This was the highest point in the city of New York. It was a combination of strength, power, money, connections, high-tech, and family heritage. With this place as the center, there was a complete airspace ban within 1,000 meters. Not to mention private jets, even military aircraft would be expelled if they approached. One side of the floor-to-ceiling windows was slightly opened. The high-altitude wind pressure from outside poured in, causing some of the paper books and documents in the office to fly continuously. Under the golden sunlight that shone in from the side, they looked like white pigeons flapping their wings to take flight. There was an exquisite and perfect woman sitting on the office chair. Her black suit couldn't hide her curvaceous body. Her legs were wrapped in black stockings and she wore a pair of black high heels. Her slender legs were slightly tilted together without any gap. Her body curves from head to toe had a kind of temptation that made men suffocate. Especially the skin on her face, wrists, and neck that was exposed to the air. It was as white as the frost in December, forming an extremely strong visual impact with the black clothes on her body. Of course, it was not just the ultimate beauty of an Eastern woman. The black-haired woman's every move revealed an innate nobility, lingering with a sense of coldness and oppression that kept people thousands of miles away. It would be more appropriate to describe her as a thorny black rose. This was the Black Queen Yutong, the first leader of Family Cal and Stark Industries after Kale's original body and Tani left. At this moment, Yu Tong, who was sitting on the chair, was sitting on a neat and clean metal desk. It was a 1-year-old baby with delicate features. He was less than half the size of a computer. He was wearing children's clothing with a teddy bear pattern printed on it. He had a lollipop in his mouth and was sitting cross-legged on the table among the piles of documents. He used a thermos cup as an armrest and raised his little head to look at Yu Tong energetically. Yu Tong also lowered her head to size up the baby boy. The two of them stared at each other, and the atmosphere was very strange. After a while, Yu Tong finally couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. She winked at the baby and said, "You're really the boss?" "Yes. But to be more precise, it's a clone of your boss. Weren't you there when the soul split, Yu Tong?" Caesar rolled his eyes and hugged his chest with his little hands. He never thought that he would have such a day. "What's your name, Yu Tong?" "You should call me that." Yu Tong smiled beautifully. She curled her fingers slightly, and an invisible transcendent consciousness pulled Caesar into the air. He broke free of gravity and rushed into her arms. Caesar didn't resist and let Yu Tong hug him tightly. He buried his little face in her towering, warm chest and almost couldn't breathe. Fortunately, he had a small super physique after awakening his kryptonite genes. "Boss, your clone's appearance is simply too cute." Yu Tong's beautiful eyes seemed to be shining with stars. It was as if she had returned to the era of the demon Loli and played with Caesar like a pillow. After Caesar struggled and protested, Yu Tong reluctantly put Caesar back on the table. "Yu Tong, you used to be very virtuous and proper," Caesar said seriously with a straight face. However, with his clone's super cute appearance and pretended mature tone, it was funny like a cat with claws and fangs. It wasn't intimidating at all. Yu Tong was amused and covered her mouth. She stuck out her pink tongue and said, "That's because your main body? What's wrong with my main body?" Caesar raised his eyebrows, which were barely there. "Nothing." Yu Tong shook her head and didn't say what she was thinking. Kale's main body was the person who saved her from the Tokyo Underground Research Institute and gave her a new home. In front of his main body's image, which hadn't changed for 100 years, Yu Tong was just a little girl who hadn't grown up, no matter how strong and mature she was. Yes, in front of Kale's main body, Yu Tong would still be a little nervous. Now, even though she knew that their souls were the same and Caesar was Kale, the baby image of Caesar's clone made her feel very relaxed. "Okay, I almost guessed it." Caesar chewed the candy in his mouth and spread his hands helplessly. Now that he was going to appear in this baby's body, he reckoned that he would have to start all over again. "It's okay. Outside you call me Mom. Inside I call you Boss. There's no difference." Yu Tong softly added a stab. Caesar was speechless. He felt that his state of mind after becoming a god and his human emotions were the easiest to show in his clone. Okay, let's get back to business. Chapter 347. Boss? Even Yu Tong was shocked when she saw Caesar kicking the sofa with his tiny feet. She had only wanted to use the sofa to test Caesar's reflexes. She had not expected Caesar to use the sofa as a punching bag. Imagine this: a delicate baby's foot, smaller than the size of a palm, colliding with the sofa that was more than 1 meter wide. It was like an egg hitting a rock. But in the next moment, something even more shocking happened to Yu Tong. Bang! As if a grenade had detonated nearby, the leather sofa under Caesar's feet immediately burst into 2 halves. Half of the broken sofa flew out and slammed into the white outer wall of the office, while the other half flew out and smashed through the glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. The impact caused countless broken glass fragments to fly out and fall onto the bustling buildings and streets hundreds of meters below. "Sorry, I used too much force." Caesar, who was still in the air, was also a little dumbfounded. He did not expect that activating the energy conversion in his body was like turning on an engine. He could unleash superhuman destructive power that was far beyond his physical strength. Yu Tong did not say anything. Her face was cold and stern. She quickly stood up from the office chair and clenched her slender hands in the air. Her beautiful black eyes were shining with a dazzling silver light. Buzz! An invisible wave of consciousness rippled in the office, quickly saving all the destruction that was about to go out of control. The broken sofa wreckage and the glass shards were fixed in the air, and then returned to the room according to the original trajectory of the original splashing. In the perfect control of telekinesis, it was as if time had gone back to a second or two ago. All the broken objects were forcibly pieced back to their original state. Phew. After completing all this, Yu Tong was slightly relieved. She stared at Caesar as if she was looking at a monster. She looked up and down at his small body, which was no different from that of an ordinary human baby. It was hard to imagine how his body contained superhuman strength. Boss, I finally understand. After a while, Yu Tong shook her head and sighed. Understand what? Caesar circled in the air and landed lightly on the table. He was gradually mastering the slow floating flight. Now I can understand why you said that you could make the gods fear you with just this body. Yu Tong stared at Caesar and said in disbelief, You're only 1 year old and you're already able to surprise me. I can't imagine how strong you'll be when you become an adult. I didn't expect it either. Caesar let out a bell-like laugh and said in a childish yet domineering manner, I hope those alien races can come to Earth to play in advance. Otherwise, everything will be too boring once I've passed the growth period. Who knows, but this is their only chance to take revenge on me. No matter how you look at it, it's too easy to make a move on a 1-year-old baby. Caesar decided to take a stroll in the outside world with his child's body and lure out family Cal or his former enemies. He almost didn't need to deliberately disguise himself. He was born to play the pig to eat the tiger. Yu Tong thought for a moment and agreed, it's possible. As long as you have enough safety measures, it's not impossible for you to move around freely outside. But you can't go out alone like this. You have to find some people to be bodyguards or nannies. There's no need for too many people so as to avoid scaring away some rats. I just need one person to accompany me when I go out. When Caesar said this, he clearly already had a candidate in mind. The corners of his small mouth raised into a subtle and cute arc. Half an hour later, there was a knock on the door of the office on the top floor. After Yu Tong answered from inside, the person opened the door and strode in. Eddie was travel-worn. He wore a windbreaker, a pair of wear-resistant jeans, leather motorcycle gloves, and a pair of muddy leather boots. He wiped the sweat off his forehead as he sighed and complained, Boss, what's up now? You just sent me outside the city to do some scouting work yesterday, and now you're calling me back at the last minute. Eddie raised his head and suddenly choked on his words. He saw Yu Tong sitting on the office chair as usual as the acting boss. There was nothing wrong with this, but at this moment, there was a 1-year-old child sucking on a lollipop on her lap. Where did this child come from? When Eddie looked at the child also looked at him and revealed a seemingly friendly and cute smile. At this time Yu Tong went straight to the point and said, 001 temp. All your previous missions have been cancelled. From today onwards you only have one mission. What job? Eddie shuddered. Even the poison in his body appeared to have an extremely bad premonition. Chapter 348. In the office on the top floor. Boss, you're not asking me to assassinate a politician of a big country or something, are you? My identity to the outside world is that of an official media reporter of the unnatural firm. I'm always doing things like murder and arson in the dark. It'll be troublesome if I'm recognized by other people and high-tech equipment. Eddie carefully looked at Yu Tong, who was sitting on the office chair. He shrunk his neck and said with a troubled expression, You've watched too many movies? How can there be so many targets for you to kill? Besides, after you've fully fused with the symbiotic demon, who can recognize your original appearance? Yu Tong glanced at him indifferently and said calmly, The mission for you this time will be carried out in New York City. You don't have to go out to other cities or countries. The mission content is very simple and the nature is more relaxed than usual. It's a welfare mission for any student. Simple and easy welfare mission? You're giving it to me? Eddie was pleasantly surprised. But before he could show any joy on his face, he pointed at his nose hesitantly and asked in confusion, Boss, is there really such a good mission for me? As temporary worker 001, who had the lowest status in the unnatural firm, it could be said that Eddie had taken on all the dirty and tiring jobs in the past 6 months, from assassinating national politicians to bullying gangsters. Today she said that there was a welfare mission for him. Who would dare to believe it? Yes, you're the only suitable candidate for this mission. Yu Tong smiled faintly and comforted Caesar, who was lying in her arms. Caesar had a new lollipop in his little mouth. He was lying sideways on his bouncy knees and almost fell asleep. Even if he had a superhuman body, Caesar couldn't avoid the sleepy characteristics of a baby. Just a little exercise made him feel so tired that he couldn't summon his strength and spirit. Can you tell me the details of the mission? Eddie prepared himself for the worst. He took a deep breath and asked. Your mission is to take care of him. As Yu Tong spoke, she placed her hands under Caesar's arms and lifted him up like a pet cat. Her bare feet swung slightly. Eddie's brain froze for a moment and he couldn't react in time. Yu Tong's face was cold. She didn't seem to be joking as she continued to explain, From now on, you will be his bodyguard and nanny. You will protect him 24 hours a day. If anyone dares to touch a single strand of his hair, you can choose to saw off their arm or head. All the consequences will be borne by us, the unnatural firm. Let me take care of the baby? Eddie looked at Caesar, a little dumbfounded. Caesar was hanging lazily on Yutong's palm, his pair of small eyes narrowed into slits, seemingly looking at Eddie as well. It was indeed a simple mission, but whether it was simple or not was another matter. Furthermore, this was definitely one of the most bizarre missions in history. Wait a minute, a child of this age? Boss, don't tell me he's... Eddie seemed to have thought of something. His dark eyes widened in shock, and his pupils reflected the slightly yawning little Caesar. Your reaction is too slow. Yutong's lips parted slightly. She held Caesar high in her hands and said in a gentle and firm tone, "He is Caesar Carl, the son of the symbol of peace, the future successor of Family Cal, the unnatural firm and Stark Industries." When Eddie left the office on the top floor and waited for the elevator to descend, he was still in a trance. He looked down at his left hand, which was still bent, in a daze. On his left arm, Caesar, who was using his jacket as a blanket, had already closed his eyes and was snoring evenly. He didn't show any signs of rejection at all. I've become the young master's guardian? No. Should I call him a nanny? I'm still a virgin. Really? Eddie sighed. Caesar, who was sleeping soundly in his arms, frowned slightly. He suddenly adjusted his sleeping position and kicked Eddie's soft stomach with one foot. It was clearly just a baby's unconscious kick, but the strength was extremely strong. The kick made Eddie's stomach churn and he swallowed all his complaints. I should say that he's indeed Mr. Kale's child. Eddie wanted to cry but had no tears. He had to serve him carefully and protect his safety. He couldn't scold or hit him and he couldn't even complain. What kind of child was this? This was clearly his little ancestor. When the elevator door opened, Eddie could only walk into the elevator and press the button to descend to the first floor. What should I do, buddy? Quickly think of a way. In the descending elevator, Eddie asked for help from the symbiotic poison in his body. He felt that he wasn't holding a baby in his arms, but a C4 explosive that could explode at any time. That's the descendant of that one. What can I do? Just follow the orders of the big sister first. Such a noble young master can't be left to a single dog like you to take care of for a long time. Poison cleanly admitted defeat and then said with confusion, I don't know if it's just my imagination. In short, I can vaguely feel an unfathomable energy from the young master's body. What do you mean? Eddie asked in a low voice. His gaze quietly fell on the sleeping Caesar's small face. Caesar's cute sleeping posture was harmless to humans and animals. We symbiotes can detect the energy value of other creatures. It's an objective value that combines biological energy, vitality, body magnetic field, static current, bloodline genes, and so on. Fearing that Eddie's host couldn't understand, Poison even gave an analogy. The big sister just now, Miss Yutong's energy value can be described as the moon. Her strength is admirable and almost impossible to catch up to. Mr. Kale's energy value is like the sun high up in the sky. It's so strong and scorching that it's impossible to even get close to it. Then what about me? Eddie asked curiously. You. Poison paused and said bluntly, if it weren't for my symbiotic assistance, your energy value wouldn't even be comparable to the dim stars in the sky. It's already not bad to compare it to a rock on the ground. You really don't give me any face. Eddie awkwardly touched his nose with his empty right hand. Seeing that Caesar hadn't woken up, he returned to the topic at hand and asked in a low voice, then what about the young master? He's just a child. His energy value can't be higher than mine. Actually, I don't know either. Poison's words were a little confused. He muttered hoarsely, the energy value in his body is like a black hole without substance. It fluctuates so high and low that it's impossible to detect. That's why I said it was very strange. You probably sensed wrongly. Eddie didn't take it to heart. For him, a child would always be a child. Even if he was the descendant of a legendary hero, there wouldn't be much difference. Neither of them noticed that although Caesar's eyes were still closed, there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Caesar's appearance was no different from a human, but the structure of his DNA, muscles, and bones were much more complicated. Kryptonians had a large energy conversion field in their bodies. They could directly absorb solar energy by simply breathing. It was easy to suppress or hide the energy in their bodies. Eddie thought he could breathe a sigh of relief when he saw the sun again, but when he looked up and saw the scene outside the door, his scalp went numb and he was speechless. It was unknown if the news had been leaked, or if it was the reporter's keen sense. At first glance, both sides of the entrance of the building were full of reporters and media. Compared to the scene in the hall, they were even scarier. They were carrying media equipment. When they saw Eddie, they were like a group of sharks that smelled blood, crazily passing microphones with various logos to him. Usually, with Eddie's overbearing and indifferent personality, few media reporters dared to inquire about news from them. As a temporary worker of the unnatural firm and an official reporter to the outside world, Eddie was undoubtedly a hot steamed bun in the eyes of the New York reporters. As a former reporter, Eddie was also happy to be pursued and paid attention to by the outside world. He often wrangled and dealt with some media reporters on a daily basis. But now he had a big secret. Once it was exposed, it would be troublesome in the future. No comment. Without waiting for them to ask, Eddie took Caesar and struggled to break through the crowd of reporters. After a while, they arrived at the place where the motorcycles were parked and started the motorcycles to get rid of the chasing reporters. At the main entrance of the DHOW building, the two K2s silently watched this scene. After looking at each other, one of them took out a delicate communicator and reported, "Watcher, this is Crimson 10. Eddie has safely left here." "Very good." On the other side of the communicator, Yu Tong's cold voice sounded. Crimson 10 said in a low voice indignantly, "I don't understand why the young master has to be protected by that temporary worker and leave the safety zone of the branch base building." I had to admit that with the help of the symbiotic demon, Eddie was indeed very powerful. He was able to complete some extremely difficult missions such as annihilation and reconnaissance. However, he was too careless and wasn't suitable for the role of a bodyguard. Especially when the target of protection is the young master. He had to admit that Crimson 10 was envious and jealous. He was not the only one. Almost all of the Family Cal's senior members were crazy with envy. For them, it was a great honor to be able to protect the descendant of the family head. To this, Yu Tong calmly responded, "Okay, don't talk so much nonsense. This is the young master's own choice." "Young master?" K2s was stunned. Then he shook his head and sighed, as expected of the young master. In the office on the top floor, Yu Tong, who was sitting on the office chair, turned off the communicator. A smile appeared on the corner of her mouth as she muttered to herself, "As you said. According to this situation, it won't take long for the whole world to know that you are outside." If Caesar wanted to use himself as bait, he had to have a huge human resource that was not beneficial to Family Cal. Otherwise, if a group of K2s stood there, no one would have the guts to have the slightest bit of evil intentions. Therefore, if Caesar wanted to move freely in the outside world, the best intermediary was the temporary worker Eddie. No matter how strong Eddie was, he was only one person and he didn't live in the DHOW building. In other people's eyes, there were a lot of loopholes that could be exploited. Yu Tong thought for a while and said to the heir on the table, "Let's put aside the family's matters for now. Monitor the communications within New York as you wish. I want to know who dares to attack our family in New York." The computer screen flashed and a cold mechanical system voice responded, "Understood." At the same time on the other side. After Eddie got rid of the reporters, he took Caesar and didn't know where to go. In the end, he chose to return to his own apartment in the neighborhood. In the past 6 months, despite being driven and tortured by the unnatural law firm, Eddie still received an additional basic salary, $100,000 a month. This basic salary was very little in the eyes of K2s, but for ordinary people, it was a huge sum of money. Eddie bought a suite on the 7th floor of a luxurious neighborhood with retired military security guards and a large parking lot in the 3rd ring of the city center. It was the first step that he officially took to reverse his life. After returning home, Eddie put Caesar, who was still sleeping, on the sofa. Under the constant urging of toxin in his mind, he helplessly and angrily walked to the sink next to the kitchen. In the 1 meter high and 5 meters wide sink, various kinds of marine fish swam in schools, and the water rippled under the light. Tropical fish for this meal. I haven't tasted it for a long time. Toxin saw the live fish and it became more excited in his mind. "Yufudi, I'm so worried. Can't you be quiet for a while?" Although Eddie said so, he still walked to the sink, and the black liquid subtly covered his arm. He put his hand into the water like lightning, splashing the water, and accurately caught a few kelp fish in his black palm. He opened his ferocious bloody mouth and threw the fish in his hand into his mouth. After a few munches, Eddie swallowed the food and let out a light burp that was filled with the smell of blood. After more than half a year of living with toxin, Eddie was already used to eating live fish, and directly biting off a human's head was not just a joke. Chapter 350. 2 more. Toxin muttered in dissatisfaction. As if it had realized that its companion was missing, The fish in the tank swam around frantically, stirring up water splashes. Don't eat, leave some for dinner. I don't want to go out with this troublesome mission. Eddie sighed softly. Bringing along a baby was troublesome enough, not to mention the baby was Family Cal's young master Caesar. After he left Dehao Tower, he thought carefully and felt that this troublesome mission was too strange. Could it be that the baby is not Caesar himself, but a substitute that Family Cal found and asked me to bring him out to attract the attention of the outside world? Eddie began to use his reporter's profession, imagining many conspiracies. But before he had time to think, the sound of the TV suddenly came from the main hall of the suite. Someone turned on the TV. Eddie. Toxin suddenly became alert and issued a strong warning in Eddie's mind. Did someone enter my house? Eddie lowered his voice and clenched his fists tightly. He was ready to enter full coverage armed combat mode at any time. He held his breath and walked silently along the dark corridor to the main hall. He was now working alone in New York without any relatives. Although he had many romantic encounters, he was still a diamond bachelor. He had worked for the unnatural firm for half a year, and his colleagues were all Red Stair Cafe's apprentices. Due to the presence of toxins, he basically did not hire a cleaner. With this pitiful situation, he could rule out acquaintances. But if it was an enemy, would the other party be coming for him or young Master Caesar? Eddie thought of Caesar and his breathing quickened. He subconsciously quickened his steps and rushed into the main hall. He did not care about hiding and almost ran instead of walking. His eyes quickly scanned around. When Eddie saw the scene in the main hall, his body suddenly stiffened like a statue. Even the toxin in his body doubted life and cursed out a galaxy curse. In the relatively clean and tidy main hall, the curtains were still drawn. The large TV screen leaning against the wall was lit up, and the channel was playing a historical war documentary that alternated between color and black and white. Under the narrators of the new era and the passionate war songs of the old era, there were precious videos of shield-wielding captains in tight stripes and golden-haired youths in black battle suits charging and breaking through enemy lines. The enemy's bullets and grenades bombarded the two of them at the edges of the battlefield. The grand scale of the tragic battle scene made one's heart ache and blood boil. Caesar, who was less than a year old, sat in the middle of the sofa facing the television. His eyes were wide open, reflecting the colorful light from the screen. He crossed his legs and leaned against the back of the sofa, holding a big bag of unsealed potato chips in his arms. His muscles were like an armor shell, and his body was covered with white lines that looked like burning flames. His whole body was filled with a violent and wild aura. The toxin controlled Eddie's body and moved forward. His footsteps made a dull sound in the hall until he approached the edge of the back of the sofa and covered Caesar with the shadow that covered the light. Caesar raised his head, wondering what Eddie and Toxin were doing. He saw Toxin suddenly move closer to his head and roar at him with a bloody mouth. Ong! A beast-like roar resounded through the hall, shaking many furniture and windows. Toxin opened his mouth wide enough to swallow the head of any adult. He looked like a predator dinosaur from the Cretaceous period. Dozens of sharp white teeth were jagged, and the top row of teeth was still dripping with disgusting mucus. This scene happened in front of him. No matter how brave a person was, they would be so scared that their legs would go weak and they would fall to the ground. Unfortunately, the target was the doppelganger Caesar. Not to mention that he already knew that Eddie and Toxin didn't have any malicious intentions. Even if they did, Caesar's heart wouldn't have any fluctuations. He looked at Toxin's forced expression and even had the impulse to laugh. Caesar raised his hand coldly and picked up a few empty potato chip bags beside him. He stuffed all of them into Eddie's wide-open mouth that was now covered in poison. Ugh! Toxin instinctively made a swallowing action. After the atmosphere froze for a few seconds, he grabbed his neck with both hands and rushed in the direction of the bathroom. Is it really the offspring of venom? Caesar muttered to himself, shook his head and sighed. Massacre is okay, but how did the third generation degenerate into a husky mode? Chapter 351. New York in 2009. Since 2008, Kale, the symbol of peace, returned to the universe again. The older generation of heroes such as Captain America Steve, once again returned to the 21st century as young and strong. The new generation of heroes such as Iron Man Stark, emerged at the speed of a rocket. Of course, Tony's ability to make money still made him almost as popular as the legendary hero Steve. The name of a hero became a unique benchmark in the new era and an eternal hot topic. The most famous stars at the moment were by no means actors or singers, but heroes with extraordinary abilities to uphold justice. Their posters were posted in every corner of the streets and alleys, and the print newspapers published almost always had gossip about heroes. The rapid rise of the city's economy and technology would be accompanied by the growth of many evils. It was only after Kale, the symbol of peace, removed the antisocial Hydra organization in one fell swoop that New York, once labeled as the city of sin, gradually became the city of heroes. Coupled with the openness of the unnatural firm and Stark Industries, advanced things such as superpowers, black technology, and aliens influenced New York City daily. Although Kale left Earth with Tawny half a year ago, the impact he left behind in New York was still transforming and subverting the city. It was late at night and the neon lights on the streets of downtown New York were turned on. The office workers who had worked for half a day were finally liberated. Most of them chose to take a few friends and beautiful girls to places such as bars to release their emotions. In the bustling area of Brooklyn, this late-night bar and late-night cafeteria named District 9 was naturally a good choice. After all, the appearance and architecture of the store leaned toward the sci-fi metal style of decoration. It also used the popular alien as a gimmick in New York in recent years, making it popular and sought after by some young people. It was already 10 o'clock at night, and there were still many guests who came to District 9 for dinner. But tonight, two different kinds of customers came to District 9's late-night cafeteria. Eddie was wearing a jacket with his hands in the pockets of his jeans. There was a lit cigarette in his mouth, and he was blowing out circles of white smoke from the corner of his mouth. After half a year of working in the unnatural firm, he was full of a cold and ruffian temperament. He looked like a typical street gangster and a delinquent youth. The most eye-catching thing was that Caesar was sitting on Eddie's left shoulder. He was wearing a children's hoodie and had a lollipop in his mouth. His bare feet were dangling in front of Eddie's chest, and he was looking around with his big bright eyes. "Hello, sir. Welcome to District 9. May I ask if it's one person, or two?" When the female receptionist at the door spoke, her gaze fell on Caesar and could not move away. To her, the child in front of her was too perfect. His soft and fair facial features were like a delicate sculpture, like an angel without any impurities and untainted by the mortal world. On the contrary, Eddie, who was like a guardian, was full of mischievousness. The difference was like heaven and earth. Poor child. The female receptionist sighed slightly, glanced at Eddie with slight disgust, and then looked at Caesar with incomparable pity. "Two," Eddie answered helplessly. He knew that he was unintentionally ridiculed by others. The victim was obviously him, a good citizen. The seemingly harmless Caesar on his shoulder was the devil. Thinking of the bag of potato chips that he had just swallowed, Eddie's face turned green again. He was in the bathroom and he didn't know how long it took him to dig out all the chips. Under the guidance of the female receptionist all the way, Eddie took Caesar and deliberately chose a corner with dim lights. There were more than a dozen tables of guests sitting in the dining area. It was like whispering and chatting. It was so lively that it didn't seem like it was late at night. When they were ordering, the waiter who came to serve them was also shocked because Eddie handed the menu to Caesar, who was sitting at the side and was not even at the height of the table. Caesar didn't stand on ceremony. He took the menu with both hands, held it in his arms, and ordered seriously. After ordering 5 servings of food, Caesar closed the menu. Eddie asked the receptionist to leave and said to Caesar with a relaxed tone, "Young master, fortunately you stopped after ordering 5 servings. Otherwise, you would have scared the people in this restaurant." "Is that so?" Caesar scratched his head and said straightforwardly, "That was only the first round. I thought that this table wasn't big enough and could only fit 5 servings." Eddie, black liquid flowed out of his arm under the table and condensed into a small black monster head. Toxin licked his mouth with a long scarlet tongue and said cheerfully in a hoarse voice, "I also ordered my favorite sashimi. Thank you, young master. Follow me. I'll eat meat and you'll drink soup." Caesar nodded and reached out his small hand, taking the initiative to stroke Toxin's head. Toxin narrowed his eyes and showed an unprecedented docile expression. Eddie almost fainted. Using a voice that only he could hear, he said to Toxin, "I'm the one who spent my money on this meal. Also, you just told me to express my attitude. Why did you betray me so quickly?" Toxin merged back into Eddie's body and replied, "I don't know what's going on, but I feel more and more that there's an inexplicable sense of intimacy and attraction to young master." "You want to change hosts?" Eddie asked in a bad mood. "I wouldn't dare." Toxin's reply was short, but Eddie still understood what it meant. This "wouldn't dare" was because of Caesar's identity as young master. Not to mention Kale behind Caesar, just Tong was enough to make Toxin cower in fear. Not to mention Toxin's background was deeply related to Kale. After the dishes were served, Most of the meat dishes were piping hot and emitted a fragrant aroma. With Eddie sitting on the outside of the seat to keep a lookout, Caesar simply sat on the table against the wall and quickly grabbed a fried chicken leg with his bare hands. He opened his small mouth and took big bites of the meat. Eddie stared at Caesar, dumbfounded. Even after Caesar finished one person's portion, his stomach didn't bulge at all. He even reached out his small hand for a second person's portion. "Young master, how can you eat so much?" Eddie swallowed his saliva and looked around. Fortunately, the light was dim and the guests at the other tables didn't notice the scene here. Otherwise, they would have been frightened and called the police. "I'm still in the growing period." Caesar snorted coldly and continued to eat. When the meat entered his mouth, his extraordinary taste buds could perfectly enjoy the taste. He even calculated and fed back the salt ratio, vitamin content, and so on in his mind. Caesar could clearly feel that his body was like a huge stove. The food he ate didn't leave any residue or impurities. In just a few seconds, it was converted into various nutrients and was continuously absorbed by the insatiable cells in his body. "You don't need to eat so much even if you're still growing," Eddie complained softly. He was still covering for Caesar, pretending that he was the one who ate all the food. While eating, Caesar quietly practiced releasing his extraordinary senses. Even though it was just the corner of his eyes, he could take in the dim, spacious restaurant. The surface of every person and every object, even if it was as tiny as a speck of dust, was reflected in his eyes with a unique glimmer. Moreover, in the entire space of this building, from the conversations of the guests at the neighboring tables to the sound of electric current in the kitchen, everything converged into a ball and poured into his eardrums. The world seemed to have been turned upside down in an instant. Chapter 352. It was a wonderful feeling. In this area of the restaurant in District 9, the decorations, tables, chairs, people inside, light, temperature, dust, wind pressure, and so on, even things that couldn't be detected by human senses, all the information was as clear as a detailed summary of data in Caesar's mind the moment he activated his extraordinary five senses. "Young master, why aren't you eating? Are you full? Or is this dish not good enough?" Eddie, who was sitting at a nearby table, was observing Caesar's every move while he was on the lookout. When he saw him suddenly stop eating, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Nothing." A faint smile appeared on Caesar's small face as he pointed to a table about 7 meters away from them. He said in a childish voice, "A couple over there is discussing whether it's safe to go out late at night. They also mentioned that there's a mysterious hero called Black Demon on this street. He's the guardian of this place." Eddie's interest was piqued. Black Demon? How can there be a hero with such a bad guy's nickname? Caesar raised his head with a strange expression and looked at Eddie. "That's right. They also said that Black Demon is a humanoid monster. His entire body is black with some white stripes. He specifically hunts bad guys at night and eats their heads, leaving a headless corpse for the police." Eddie paused slightly and opened his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. Picking up a chicken wing, Caesar took a big bite and said playfully, "I didn't think that you'd work for the law firm during the day and often go out at night to be a man-eating hero who fights criminals." "It's not me." Eddie subconsciously opened his mouth, but when he met Caesar's large eyes that seemed to see through everything, he immediately spread his hands and said helplessly, "All right, I admit it. Please help me hide it and don't tell anyone else." "That'll depend on your performance." Gently unscrewing the cap, Caesar happily held up the large bottle of cola with both of his hands. He gulped down half the bottle in one breath and let out a sigh of relief. Eddie was a little scared. The Caesar in front of him was becoming less and less like a child, and more like a cunning old fox. It was as if he had been completely taken advantage of from the beginning. "Right." Eddie looked at the dining table that Caesar had pointed at in surprise. Although it was only 7 meters away, due to the existence of the partitions, decorations, and the dim lighting in the room, he could only vaguely see two figures hugging each other and whispering into each other's ears. Compared to the noisy restaurant, it was impossible to hear what they were talking about. Eddie was puzzled. He looked sideways at Caesar and asked, "How did you hear them talking? It can't be a guess, right?" Caesar took out a tissue and wiped the grease on his hands. He said with certainty, "It's very simple. You just have to have good hearing." Eddie didn't say anything. His face with green stubble was full of disbelief. "Look over there." Seeing that he didn't believe him, Caesar raised his little finger and gestured to the single table 10 meters away. He said confidently, "There's a middle-aged uncle over there. He lost all his gambling today. His wife and child ran away with someone else." "Is he that strong?" At this time, Even the toxin in Eddie's body was skeptical. It naturally had hearing that was far superior to humans, but it still couldn't hear the slightest sound in a noisy place. "You'll know once you try," Eddie muttered. He picked up Caesar with his left hand and a glass of beer with his right. He got up and walked through the aisle to the single table. "Why did you bring me along?" Caesar was speechless. As Eddie approached the single table, there was indeed a middle-aged balding uncle sitting on the seat. He was drinking beer with his head lowered in a sullen manner while mumbling words such as loan, luck, wife, and so on in a low voice. In order to avoid igniting the green hat uncle's anger, Eddie took Caesar back to the corner seat. Caesar looked at him calmly. "Do you believe me now? How did you do it? Did you inherit your superior's telepathic ability?" Eddie was completely convinced. He looked at Caesar curiously. Rather than saying that this ability was superhuman hearing, it was more appropriate to say that it was the ability to read minds. "I already said that you can do it with good hearing." Caesar sighed softly. He glanced outside and suddenly had an idea. "Not only that, you can do more things with good hearing." "Huh?" Eddie looked at Caesar again. Young Master had already given him enough surprises today. For example, Caesar looked at the dining area. He quickly found his target and said confidently, "The second table over there, there is a glass that will be broken." Eddie looked over quickly and saw that there were 2 men and 2 women eating at the table. They were talking and laughing the whole time. One of the girls was talking excitedly and waved her arms slightly. Her elbow hit the glass at the edge of the table. With a bang, the glass shattered and fell to the ground. This accident shocked the surrounding customers. The waiters rushed over to help clean up the glass shards. From the time Caesar said the prophecy to the time when the glass fell to the ground and broke, there was a difference of 2 to 3 seconds. It was purely an accident. There was no third party or telepathic power. Eddie looked at Caesar with a dry mouth. "Young Master, how did you do it? Don't tell me you heard it." "More or less. But this time I used my eyes and scientific algorithms." Caesar smiled. To be able to do this seemingly prophecy ability, one only needed superhuman hearing, vision, and consciousness, as well as a set of scientific algorithms. It was like an airplane flying at a height of 10,000 meters with a damaged fuel tank. If one could monitor the local weather and wind direction, the strength of the airplane's engine, the speed of the fuel loss, the rescue time of the refueling fighter, and be familiar with the emergency judgment of the pilot and central command, as long as there were no other accidents, one could predict in advance what kind of ending the airplane would face and even where it would crash. As long as Caesar wanted to know, through his newly awakened eyes and ears, he could obtain information about everything in the dining area. Time in his perception was much slower than that observed by humans. Just now, he heard the conversation between the 2 men and 2 women. He knew that the glass was near the edge of the table and saw that the female customer was in high spirits. Her arm muscle frequency showed signs of increasing. Thus, he was able to determine in advance that the glass had fallen to the ground. Knowing everything, he could predict and see the amazing performance of the future scene. Caesar didn't explain too much to Eddie in detail. He just gave a general idea, and Eddie was already looking at him in disbelief. "Young Master, are you a prodigy? Please remove the word prodigy." Caesar shrugged lightly. Just then, the main door of the dining area opened. 3 bearded men in trench coats and jackets walked in and sat at the table near the door under the service of the waiter. "Young Master, can you predict what the 3 customers will order again?" Eddie poured a large glass of beer for Caesar. "I don't know how to read minds. Also, is it appropriate to pour beer for me?" Caesar rolled his eyes and glanced at the 3 bearded men. He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said inexplicably, "They seem to be criminals." Chapter 353. Criminals? Eddie widened his eyes in shock and carefully looked at the 3 burly men. When he noticed that they weren't looking at him, he lowered his voice and said, "Young Master, is what you said true? How could it be false?" Caesar seemed to be slightly dissatisfied with Eddie's trust in him. He opened his small mouth and stuffed half a drumstick into his mouth. His cheeks puffed up like a balloon as he vaguely explained. They all had guns and knives on their waist. Although they were covered by their jackets, I couldn't have mistaken the shape of their waists when they walked in. Also, after they entered the restaurant, their eyes quietly glanced in the direction of the cashier counter and the camera. There was also a faint smell of blood on their bodies. It's very likely that they are repeat criminals who have killed people and left a criminal record. Eddie nodded silently. When Caesar was halfway through his explanation, he basically believed the judgment of the higher-ups. However, his face was still calm and indifferent. He raised his glass full of beer and carefully tasted it. He only used the corner of his eyes to size up the 3 suspected criminals. Black Demon, are you not coming out tonight? Caesar opened his big cute eyes and looked at Eddie with a faint smile on his innocent little face. Eddie exhaled lightly and said as if nothing had happened, "They're lucky. Don't they still have to protect you? Try not to cause any unnecessary trouble. You worry too much. With the temporary status of Family Cal's protection, it's fine to kill a few criminals." Caesar continued to drink the cola uninterestedly. He didn't even burp and only tasted the excitement. His eyes curved into crescents as the soda was completely digested and turned into a bioenergy source as soon as it entered his stomach. Even Eddie, who was used to killing and arson missions, couldn't help but feel a little scared when he saw a baby talking about killing people so casually. He complained in a low voice, "Please, young master, don't talk about killing people as if it's as scary as crushing ants." His appearance was clearly as pure as an angel's, but he was very mischievous and had the evil thoughts of a demon from hell. "Isn't it?" Caesar grunted. His small face was so cold that he did not look human. Compared to his Geno-deified body, his doppelganger had enough humanity. "All right, let's finish eating and go back." Despite Eddie's urging, Caesar still took his time to enjoy the food. Only then did he realize that his body was not starving. It was just a one-sided desire to taste the nutrients and energy provided by the various impurities in Earth's food other than pure energy like darkness and the sun. Half an hour later. It was already 11 o'clock at night, and half of the customers in the restaurant had left. Only 3 or 4 tables of customers, including Eddie, were left. At the table near the door, 3 burly men sat together with their arms around each other's shoulders. They gulped down vodka as if it was water. After a while, their necks and faces turned red as they drunkenly talked about the north, south, east, and west. "Third brother, today is the day you came out. Tonight we really won't go home until we're drunk." The burly man who was slightly tall and strong laughed and patted the shoulder of the skinny man beside him heavily. Under the influence of alcohol, Third brother's nature was like the darkness that grew in the night. He replied fiercely, "Yes. I've been in there for 5 years and the world outside has changed so much. I've really suffered a great loss. All the fun that I didn't get to enjoy in those years, I'll get it all back when I come out. It's not that I want to criticize you, second brother. You have the 2 of us to protect you. You can do whatever you want without any scruples." The burly man who was slightly short put down his wine glass and winked. When he smiled, his brown beard stood up, making him look like a rat in a canal. Obviously, the 3 of them were not good citizens. Under the influence of alcohol, they gradually revealed their true nature. The conversation openly turned to talk about women, drugs, and the like. They turned a blind eye to the other customers who were still eating around them. Of the 2 customers sitting next to them, the female, Annie, frowned slightly uneasily. She whispered a few words to her male colleague sitting next to her. The male colleague was obviously Annie's admirer. It was rare for him to ask out the most beautiful female colleague in the company, so he naturally didn't want to give up. However, the 3 burly men at the next table really disturbed the atmosphere. "Then the bill, let's meet again next time." The male colleague nodded helplessly. Annie hurriedly picked up the fashionable handbag and tried her best to avoid the burly man at the next table. She kicked her high heels and was about to escape from the restaurant and jogged to the door. "Ah!" When she passed by the next table, Annie exclaimed and staggered. It turned out that the second brother at the next table put his foot on the aisle and accidentally tripped her. "Woman, what's wrong with you?" The second brother's foot was also stepped on by the high heels. He stood up in pain and glared at Annie with his gloomy eyes. Fortunately, Annie didn't fall directly to the ground. She held onto the corner of the table and steadied herself. She lowered her head and quickly apologized sincerely. The second brother let out a strange cry and stared blankly at Annie. Annie was an intern who had just graduated from a local university. She was full of youthful energy. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. She wore a formal office uniform and black high heels. Her already beautiful face, after a little makeup, became even more alluring under the ambiguous dim light. Especially after the stimulation of alcohol, this unique temptation to males increased greatly. Not only the second brother, the other 2 burly men also couldn't take their eyes off Annie. They felt a ball of evil fire rising in their lower abdomens. "This chick is too hot." The third brother licked his lips and said. His eyes were glowing with a faint green light as his gaze wandered around Annie's body. He had picked up soap in prison for 5 years. How could he resist a young and beautiful chick like Annie? Annie saw the three of them looking at her with beast-like eyes. Her delicate face turned pale and she couldn't help but take a step back. "If there's nothing else, I'll leave first." "Don't," the eldest brother said and grabbed Annie's wrist with his big hand. He showed a row of black-yellow teeth and said, "You stepped on our second brother and hurt him. You should apologize properly." "That's right." The other two men were lustful and echoed, "You guys." Annie's face was completely pale. She looked at the male colleague behind her for help. The male colleague was dressed in a suit. He bit his lips and hesitated. However, when he saw Annie's helpless and weak eyes, he thought that this was a great opportunity to gain her favor. He mustered his courage and stepped forward and shouted, "Please let go." Bang! A loud gunshot was heard. The male colleague suddenly stopped talking and touched his left chest. He looked down and saw that his hand was stained with warm blood. He blacked out and fell to the ground. Annie widened her beautiful eyes in shock. She looked at the male colleague who was eating supper a moment ago and turned into a cold corpse in the next second. The third brother retracted his hand that was holding the gun and put the muzzle close to his mouth. He gently blew away the remaining smoke. The atmosphere in the restaurant was silent for half a second. Then the customers screamed in the restaurant. Both the waiters and customers wanted to escape to the door. Bang! The third brother shot at the ceiling again and sneered at the others, "Everyone lie down under the table. Whoever dares to move or call the police will have to eat the bullets." Then he said to the eldest brother and the third brother in a half-drunk and half-serious manner, "Eldest brother and second brother, since we've already started, why don't we have a good time tonight?" The eldest brother and second brother looked at each other. They looked at Annie and swallowed their saliva. They laughed obscenely. "Who can save me?" Annie's eyes were red. Her hand was grabbed by the eldest brother and second brother was holding her other hand. She could not break free from the two men's strength. "You guys go out and have fun first. I'll look after the people in the room. You can let me have some second-hand fun later." The third brother held the gun and said very righteously, "Good brother." The eldest brother and second brother could not hold it in any more. They dragged Annie, who was crying, out of the door. The third brother stood at the door with the gun and looked at the people in the restaurant who were squatting down with their hands on their heads. He was ready to shoot whoever dared to resist or call the police. At the same time, at the dining table in the corner, Eddie clenched his fists. His forehead was full of veins because of anger. He said, "Young master, I can't hold it in any more." There was no reply. Eddie looked sideways. He was shocked to find that the table was empty except for the leftovers. Caesar was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 354. In the alley next to the shop in District 9. The narrow area between the tall buildings made of reinforced concrete could not even be touched by the sun during the day. At night, the street lights could not even reach the dark corners of the bustling city. Places like alleys and sewers were too suitable for criminals to commit crimes. Accompanied by a series of ugly laughter and cries, the two alleys dragged Annie into the alley. The two burly men took Annie to the alley. Although Annie had been resisting with all her might throughout the entire process, it was impossible for her to break free on her own. Her high heels fell off on the way out of the restaurant, and her legs that were wrapped in black stockings were exposed to the air. The stockings tore a few holes in her resistance, and her white skin was exposed. "Help, is there anyone?" Annie's cry for help was a little hoarse. The boss skillfully took out a napkin from the restaurant and stuffed it into Annie's wide-open mouth, turning her voice into a weak whimper. "Behave yourself and let us brothers vent our frustrations. Otherwise you'll suffer." The second boss pushed Annie down and made her lean against the wall of the alley. His hands could not help but move up and down, tearing off Annie's uniform jacket. "Exactly." The boss chuckled and reached out to take off Annie's short skirt. Annie's eyes were filled with tears as she whimpered. It was getting harder for her to resist. Seeing that she was about to be defiled by the thugs, her beautiful and delicate face was filled with despair. Just then, a voice that was like the sound of nature rang out coldly, "Thugs, let go of the girl." Under the light of the street lights outside the alley, a huge monster-like shadow covered the boss and the second boss. The two of them were shocked and slightly sobered up, stopping their evil actions. Annie opened her eyes again, her falling heart began to rise again. She looked out of the alley with the two criminals in anticipation. The next moment, the three of them were stunned. Outside the alley, a 1-year-old baby who was not even considered a kid stood barefoot on the concrete floor. He had a lollipop in his mouth and his hands were coldly stuffed into the pockets of his cute children's clothes. Previously, due to the angle of the street lights, Caesar's shadow was constantly elongated and enlarged, making him look like a tall and majestic monster. Boss, was it an illusion? No, it shouldn't be. So it's a little hero. Is that so? No wonder there's such a strong smell of milk, ha. Seeing that it was just a child, eldest brother and second brother lost their vigilance and even laughed and mocked him. At this moment, Annie's heart once again fell into endless despair. This time, not only did she suffer, but she also implicated a child. Hey little one, were you talking just now? Second brother stood up with a ferocious grin. He took off his jacket and shirt, revealing his thin chest with various ugly scars. He gestured with his big arms that could be considered as steel. That's right. Let go of the girl and I'll leave your corpses intact. Caesar said seriously, but his childish words were like a cat baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. They didn't have any deterrent effect at all. Based on who? Your family's adults or you? Second brother laughed heartily and casually walked towards Caesar, who was not even 1/5 of his size. Eldest brother watched silently with a cold smile. It was just a baby boy who had been separated from his family. It would be easier to deal with him than to deal with a cat. Annie whimpered and blinked anxiously. She wanted to signal Caesar to run away quickly, but Caesar was completely unmoved. He stood there calmly and watched as second brother approached him. Get out of here quickly. Don't disturb our business. Thinking that there was a delicate beauty behind him, the second brother couldn't help but quicken his pace. He walked up to Caesar and raised his left foot to kick him, wanting to kick this annoying child away like a rubber ball. Caesar narrowed his eyes dangerously. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and leaped nearly a meter into the air. He dodged second brother's kick by a hair's breadth and floated in front of him. He clenched his tiny fist, and with seemingly light strength, a punch landed on his second brother's chest. Crack. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. His chest caved in obviously. Second brother's eyes widened and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt as if he had been hit by an iron ball with a ton of force. His bodily functions could not withstand the impact and his whole body flew backward like a big rubber ball. Clatter. Second brother's back hit the concrete floor. He rolled a few times and finally stopped at the feet of eldest brother, who was the leader of the villains. Eldest brother looked down in horror. Second brother's eyes were closed and he was no longer breathing. It was not uncommon to see someone kill someone, but it was rare to see someone kill someone with a single punch, let alone a baby boy who had killed a strong man with a single punch. Monster, an alien monster. Eldest brother thought of the rumors about aliens in New York and the restaurant called District 9. He immediately associated Caesar with an alien monster. He was right. Caesar's body was originally of Kryptonian blood. Eldest brother took out the pistol from his waist and aimed at Caesar. He shouted in fear, "Don't come any closer. I'll shoot you if you come any closer." Caesar continued to bicker and ignore the warning. He strode forward with his small feet. 5 meters, 4 meters, 3 meters. Eldest brother's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He held the pistol with both hands and pulled the trigger 3 times in a row. Bang, bang, bang. The moment the gunshot rang out, no, it should be said that the moment the finger pulled the trigger and the bullet was ready to be fired, Caesar's eyes narrowed slightly, and the patterns in his pupils expanded. After activating his extraordinary senses and willpower, the world he saw was different from ordinary people. The flow of time slowed down significantly. The 3 bronze bullets and their trajectories were clearly reflected in Caesar's eyes. A distance of 3 meters was just a moment for bullets, but in his perception it seemed a little slow. He had enough time to react. It was not a big deal to take the bullets, let alone dodge them. Caesar did what he wanted. He did not dodge. He reached out and grabbed the 3 bullets flying toward him. The moment his fingers touched the bullets, he felt a slight resistance and a slight pain from the impact. But the power of the bullets was gone before his skin was hurt. Well, it was just a pistol. Caesar lowered his head and looked at the 3 bullets lying in his palm. He had achieved the first achievement, catching bullets with his bare hands. Although the process took a long time, in fact, it was less than half a second in human perception. I must be drunk or dreaming. Or am I dreaming? Boss opened his mouth wide in shock and took a deep breath. He looked at Caesar and was completely speechless. Caesar threw the bullets away. They fell to the ground and clanked. He said to eldest brother seriously, "Yes, you're drunk. This is just a dream. As long as you fall or die, you can leave this dream." Really? It's just a dream. Eldest brother was quite shocked. Coupled with the alcohol, he laughed wildly. Without thinking, he put the pistol to his head. "I want to leave this damn dream." Bang. He pulled the trigger and the gunshot rang out. Eldest brother's head burst open and he fell straight to the ground. Caesar saw this and was stunned. After a while he shook his head and sighed. Poor person who has never seen the inception dream. You should find a spinning top to spin around. Otherwise you won't even know how you died. Chapter 355. Early in the morning, the breeze blew the curtains and the golden sunlight shone through the window, causing the floor and walls to shine brightly. The furniture and decorations in the room gradually became brighter. Eddie woke up from his dream after being hit in the face. He got up and pulled the blanket aside. Caesar was lying upside down beside him with one foot on his stomach. The other foot was the culprit who attacked his face. Eddie got up in his pajamas and looked at Caesar, who was lying on the bed. The events that happened last night suddenly became clear in his mind. It should be said that it was unforgettable. Last night, with the help of the symbiotic toxin, Eddie quickly put down the criminal Lao San in the restaurant. Because he was worried about Caesar's safety and the fact that a female citizen was being violated, he rushed out of the door. The result was obvious. When Eddie rushed to the alley, the cold bodies of the two criminals were already lying on the ground. Caesar even took off Lao San's jacket and gentlemanly covered Annie's body with it. That was also the first time Eddie knew that young Master Caesar was not as weak as he looked. On the contrary, the strength in his small body was immeasurable. Eddie wanted to show off in front of Annie, but the sharp sirens of police cars came from the street. In order to avoid trouble, he could only carry Caesar and leave the scene in a hurry. Eddie changed his clothes, washed up, and ate some fresh fish for breakfast. After he was satisfied with the symbiotic toxin in his body, he yawned and returned to the room. "Young master, what are you doing?" As soon as he entered the room, Eddie saw Caesar sitting on the edge of the bed. The sunlight that came in through the window refracted in the air and finally gathered on Caesar's body in a slightly glaring manner. "Have you never seen a person eating breakfast before?" Caesar shrugged and glanced at him angrily. The light that gathered on his body quickly dissipated, and the room returned to its original state. Eddie's mouth twitched slightly. "It's not strange to eat breakfast, but this is the first time I've seen solar energy as breakfast." After coming into contact with young Master Caesar for less than a day, some of his ideas were constantly being refreshed. "Then let's go out for breakfast." Caesar stood up and stretched lazily. "Didn't you just eat?" Eddie asked in surprise. "That was just replenishing my energy. I haven't even tasted the actual breakfast yet," Caesar said matter-of-factly. These words probably only applied to his strange body that could convert energy. The nutritional energy replenished by food could not compare to solar energy. However, when absorbing natural pure energy, Caesar did not feel like he was eating at all. This was a waste of such a good transcendent taste buds. "Can I not go out?" Eddie's face was bitter. After what happened last night, he completely understood that the young master in front of him must not be treated as a 1-year-old. Otherwise he would be played to death by him. Whether it was thinking, strength, ability, concept, or action, they were all far beyond an adult. Killing was something he was born with. If he did not know Caesar's origin, even if someone said that he was the incarnation of a devil, an alien, or a descendant of God, Eddie would choose to believe without a doubt. Those so-called geniuses and prodigies were nothing compared to Caesar. Eddie would feel extremely uneasy if he were to wander around outside with such a special existence. "I want to go out for breakfast. This is an order," Caesar suddenly said. Eddie was suddenly dumbfounded and realized that he did not seem to have the right to refuse. He almost forgot that he was a temporary worker who sold his body. No matter how he looked at it, he could not resist the order of an unnatural successor of the firm. It turned out that helping the boss to look after the young master was fake. The real thing was that he was ordered by the young master himself. Eddie woke up from a dream, but it was too late. He could only agree and use his shoulder as a vehicle to take Caesar out. The two first had breakfast in a nearby street, bought a New York newspaper in a newspaper shop, and sat on an outdoor chair outside a fast food restaurant to rest. From the newspaper, Caesar accidentally obtained some information that he was currently interested in. First of all, the media was really sensitive to current affairs in the city. What happened in District 9 last night was published in a corner of the newspaper early this morning. According to the description of the restaurant waiters and guests, as well as the victim Annie Wei-Ing, the news release recorded in detail about the 3 drunken villains who caused trouble in the restaurant. A young man was unfortunately shot and Annie was assaulted. One of the criminals was immediately punished by the rumored Black Demon, and the other 2 criminals were killed on the spot by a blonde child. Black Demon was fine, but what kind of new character was the blonde child? This caused a heated discussion among the people of New York, and they also had strong doubts about the news release. They generally suspected that the people involved said something wrong because they were frightened. "Young master, if you make a few more moves, it will be difficult to hide your identity." Eddie sighed. He got a small round hat from somewhere and covered Caesar's sparse but shiny blonde hair. "It doesn't matter," Caesar snorted, sat on Eddie's shoulder, and continued to read the newspaper that Eddie was reading. There was a huge article that focused on Stark News. It was about Stark Industries. In the past few days, core employees had been attacked by terrorists one after another. As of yesterday, 6 employees had died. They were all elite talents in the research and development department, causing panic in the industry. "They still haven't found the murderer? It seems that they are not ordinary terrorists," Eddie whispered with a frown. "What's going on? Do you know the details?" Caesar asked Eddie coldly. Now that Tani and his main body were out in the universe and Stark Industries was his family's business, when his main body was in New York, how could such a thing happen? "I know a little but not much." Eddie thought for a while and said solemnly, "A few days ago when I was performing other tasks, I heard that 2 Stark Industries employees were assassinated on the road after work. There were no surveillance cameras that captured the scene. There were only burn marks left on the scene and no clues could be found." "Burn?" Caesar held his chin and seemed to have thought of something, but it quickly dissipated like a cloud. After experiencing so many things outside of his rebirth, after he completely integrated into this world, some of his memories of his previous life became more and more blurry. His existence also interfered with the timeline of the original plot. What original plot of the movie? Now only bits and pieces were left. However, he would never forget about a hidden universe villain like Thanos. Did anyone from Family Cal and SHLD investigate? Caesar thought and said. Eddie looked around and said in a low voice, "Of course they did." At first, Yutong's boss also attached great importance to it and sent a team of 3 people. SHLD also sent 3 teams of special agents to investigate this matter. But the day before yesterday, I heard that even the people investigating were attacked. 1 K2 and 3 SHLD special agents died. They were afraid of causing social panic, so they didn't announce it to the public. I thought the boss would send me to investigate this matter. I didn't expect to be sent to take care of you. As Eddie spoke, he suddenly slapped his forehead and said softly, "Oh right, why am I telling you this? Do you still think of me as a child?" Caesar rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. He said without hesitation, "I've decided. Right now, I'm heading towards Stark Industries." Chapter 356. Stopping the motorcycle on the side of the road, Eddie took off his helmet and looked up at the spectacular industrial complex in front of him. Under the bright sun hanging high in the blue sky, these steel skyscrapers reflected a dazzling flash. Whether it was the area, the main office building, the office staff, the high-tech equipment in the manufacturing industry, and a series of modern sci-fi decoration style, etc., they could only be described as luxurious. It was as if they were unwilling to bow their heads and lose to other local companies in New York. The history and value of the industry were placed on the surface without any concealment. This was the world-famous Stark Industries. Although it focused on the development of technology and weapons, it also involved electronic products, biomedicine, artificial intelligence, etc., and cooperated with business and military. Not to mention the comprehensive development, Stark Industries was able to maintain the top position in every industry. Stark products must be the best. This was the business law and reputation that no one in the industry dared to question. Stark Industries was founded during the dark business period of the economic depression during World War II. The founder, Stark Howard, was the chairman of the board and the symbol of peace. Cale had half of the shares. After the end of the war, as the world was peaceful and the economy recovered, new electronic products such as mobile phones and computers quickly developed into a giant in the business world. Later, when Howard left the earth and mysteriously disappeared, this heavy burden fell on Stark Tani, who was only 20 years old. Many people originally thought that Stark Industries, which had lost the double protection of Howard and Cale, would fall from the altar. But who knew that Stark Tani would surpass him? Although his private life was unsightly, and he was conceited and arrogant, Tani's extraordinary intelligence and his hands not only stabilized Stark Industries' position as the #1 in the business world, but he also led Stark Industries to create one legendary history after another. For decades, he had never given up the throne of the top 500 companies in the world. Especially a year and a half ago, Tani was born as Iron Man, and the Iron Man suit redefined the Earth's technological machinery and artificial intelligence. At first, the government, military and private high-tech companies tried every means to make Tani hand over the manufacturing technology of the Iron Man armor, but due to Tani's tough temperament and the existence of his godfather Kale, no one dared to force Tani. After a while, they were unwilling to be silent. Now, after Tani and Kale left Earth together, the manufacturing industry, which was recognized as an industry that transcended its time, actually had news of employees being attacked and killed repeatedly. Eddie tilted his chin back and helplessly asked the backpack, "Young master, are you sure you want to investigate this matter? Unnatural Firm and SHLD have already taken over, so we won't participate, right?" The zipper of the dark backpack automatically opened, and Caesar slowly climbed out of it, sat back on Eddie's shoulder, and calmly looked at Stark's office building and said, "Of course, otherwise why would we come here? Then let's go to a nearby hotel and wait until the evening? Lurk in the streets around and see if we can meet the criminals who attacked the employees." Eddie quickly gave a seemingly good proposal with his half-year of experience in performing missions. Caesar gave him a blank look and said angrily, "Wait for the rabbit? Your method is too passive. I believe that Katu and the agents have used this method, and the problem has not been solved so far. Obviously the effect is not very good." Toxin agreed with him. "I also think this proposal is very problematic. Toxin, you fence-sitter, don't forget that I'm your host." Eddie complained a few times and scratched his head. He felt like he was serving his ancestor, so he continued to suggest, "How about we disguise ourselves as Stark Industries employees and see if we can find any clues inside?" Caesar shook his head and said with certainty, "No need to go through so much trouble, we can just go directly to the door." Stark Industries was his territory. The main office building of Stark Industries was a skyscraper with hundreds of floors, and it could accommodate thousands of employees working at the same time. The entire building was equipped with a top-notch smart security program. Every day, employees had to have an employee pass to enter and exit, and they had to have a certain amount of authorization to enter the higher floors. In other words, without authorization or an application to enter, they couldn't even pass through the front door of the industrial building. They would be scanned by the smart program and immediately taken away by the security police. Under Caesar's signal, Eddie walked directly to the door. As a result, as soon as he passed through the detector, there were alarms going off everywhere. Before he could enter the glass front door, Eddie was surrounded by a team of tall and burly security guards. Due to the surprise attack that had happened in the past few days, the security measures of Stark Industries had been increased by more than 3 times. The security guards were especially vigilant against people entering and exiting, let alone someone like Eddie who was like an extreme villain. "What should we do now, young master?" Facing the security guards, Eddie shrugged helplessly. Caesar was a little speechless. He really didn't think that Eddie didn't even have the minimum authorization to enter Stark Industries. It must be known that even a random Katu in the family could freely enter and exit Stark Industries, except for the energy core and the steel exterior. "Sir, did you come to the wrong place? Why did you bring a child here?" When the security guards saw Caesar on Eddie's shoulder, they relaxed a lot. At least, even if it was an attacker, they wouldn't bring a child out to commit a crime. Eddie was also a little embarrassed. He hesitated and said, I have a friend who works here. He said that when he was free, he could come and visit the interior of Stark Industries. I happen to be free today, so I came to take a look." "What's your friend's name?" "It's a special period now. Other than the internal employees, no one else is allowed to enter or leave the building." A security guard picked up the communicator and waited for Eddie's answer. If there was anything wrong, he would immediately dial the alarm button. "My friend's name is..." Eddie's face was bitter. He didn't have a friend. He just said it casually, but now he had forced himself into a difficult situation. "Ah, it's you guys." Just then, a female's exclamation sounded from behind, causing Eddie to look towards the source of the sound. He saw a beautiful girl wearing a professional suit. Her blonde hair was draped over her shoulders, and her blue eyes were open. She looked inexplicably familiar. Caesar immediately recognized her. It was the woman he saved from the drunken criminals last night. "Miss Annie, do you know this gentleman?" the security guard asked. "Of course I know him." Annie smiled brightly and jogged towards Eddie. She even opened her arms and prepared to hug him. Just as Eddie instinctively opened his arms, Annie hugged Caesar, who was on his shoulder, with a burst of fragrance. She used her delicate face and slightly large breasts to rub against Caesar fiercely. Chapter 357. Stark Industries, outside of the main office building. Seeing Annie hugging Caesar so intimately, Eddie and the other security guards were stunned. They looked at Caesar with envy, and at the sight of Annie's perky breasts, which were deformed due to the friction. They wished they could switch places with Caesar. Caesar, on the other hand, felt his entire body falling into the girl's soft embrace. His mouth and nose were covered by 2 warm and fragrant cotton balls. It was only because he recognized Annie and did not feel any hostility from her that he was worried that he would accidentally send her flying away due to his lack of control. That was why he did not show any intention of resisting or struggling. His little face maintained a calm and arrogant look that didn't match his age, allowing the other party to take advantage of him. After a while, Annie reluctantly put Caesar back on Eddie's shoulder. Her beautiful blue eyes were still staring at him. Annie was so excited that she forgot everything when she suddenly met her savior yesterday. After being interviewed by the police and the media, although Annie had explained everything clearly, both the police and the media were still suspicious of the 1-year-old child that appeared in the incident. They repeatedly asked Annie if she had seen wrongly, or if she was hallucinating because of the shock to her mental state. After all, there were heroes who held swords and shields, who had infinite strength, who could leap over roofs and vault over walls, and who could transform into non-human monsters. However, a hero who looked like a 1-year-old child was unheard of even in New York City, which was at the forefront of the new era. Annie couldn't help but get angry when she was questioned. She swore on her reputation and character that what she said was true. Because her body only had some minor bruises and she was frightened, she took in 4 drip and slept in the hospital. Today she took the time to rush back to the company to continue her work. She didn't expect that she would coincidentally meet Eddie and Caesar, who wanted to enter Stark Industries. Annie recognized Caesar from afar. Despite his young age and stature, he had an indifferent and cold expression on his face. Furthermore, there was a faint aura of power and nobility emanating from his body. Other than Caesar, there was probably no other person on Earth who could match him. "Miss Annie, do you know this gentleman?" The leading security guard pointed at Eddie and asked in surprise. "This gentleman?" Annie's gaze shifted to Eddie. She hesitated for a moment. Under Eddie's hinting gaze, she shook her head and said coldly, "I don't know him." Then Annie's gaze fell on Caesar. She gently smiled and said, "But I know this little friend. Do you want this big sister to take you to Stark Industries?" "Ah, woman." Caesar calmly turned his face away. Annie's attitude towards the two was completely different. It was a sharp contrast. Under the mocking laughter in his mind, Eddie's ears drooped down. Last night, he was supposed to be the hero saving the damsel in distress. In the end, after he took care of the criminal in the restaurant, the other 2 criminals were taken away by Caesar. Eddie looked at Caesar. "Okay." Caesar didn't expect Eddie to be so unreliable that he couldn't even enter Stark Industries. He shrugged and jumped down from Eddie's shoulder. He lightly stood on the smooth metal floor and walked towards the detection area at the glass door. Eddie didn't stop him. He looked at Caesar's back. There was a hint of realization and helplessness in his eyes. Under Annie and the security guard's bewildered gaze, Caesar's small body reached the glass door. He calmly stepped into the detection area of the high-tech smart equipment. Beep beep. In Caesar's vision, a green light swept across his body from top to bottom. The speaker sounded like an alarm, and in the next moment, it immediately turned into a respectful welcome. "Identity detection successful. Carl Caesar, you have the highest authority in Stark Industries. Everyone in Stark Industries is at your service." At the same time, all the different office areas and staff in Stark Industries received the paging and notification message at the same time. When the leader of the security guards heard the beeping of the communicator, he took it out from his pocket in a daze. He looked at the text message displayed on the screen and read, "All security guards, please go to the main entrance on the 1st floor of the main office building. Ensure Carl Caesar's safety and maintain the security order at the scene." Annie took out her phone and whispered, "The message I received is, ordinary staff, please maintain your work. Do not leave your post without permission. Those above the management level, please wait in the office for Carl Caesar's spot check or task assignment." "Is the boss back? Wait, why does the name Carl Caesar sound so familiar?" The people outside the door looked at each other. They looked at Caesar, who was standing at the door, and soon reacted with shock. Carl's surname, Caesar's name? Wasn't this the son of the symbol of peace that caused a heated discussion in the society when Kale and Tawny left half a year ago? "Tawny, that guy is really something. Before he left, he set up the authority and welcome for my clone like this. I guess he even considered that he wouldn't be able to come." Caesar sighed slightly. However, he didn't want to hide his identity since a long time ago. With a certain high status, it would be much more convenient to deal with things. Besides, he wanted to announce his existence to the public when he left the Dehao building. He was prepared to be exposed to the outside world for a long time. However, this was the opposite of what Eddie had thought. Eddie saw that things had come to this point. He couldn't help but look at the leader of the security guards who were stunned. He snorted coldly and said, "I'm that person's bodyguard. Can I go in now?" Of course. The leader of the security guards swallowed his saliva and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He respectfully invited Eddie in with both hands. Eddie was too lazy to respond. He walked coldly behind Caesar and squatted forward slightly. Caesar turned sideways and stepped on Eddie's thigh. He jumped back onto his shoulder and waved at Annie, who was still a little absent-minded behind him. He said in a childish tone, "You're also an employee of Stark Industries, right? Didn't you say you would bring me in for a tour? Then you can be the guide. I want to understand the current situation of Stark Industries from you." Annie was stunned. She smiled bitterly and nodded. Young Master Caesar. Thus, Caesar, who had revealed his identity, sat on Eddie's shoulder. Annie led the way into the main office building. Naturally, there was no obstruction along the way. When the employees saw the three of them, they respectfully made way for them. They didn't stop calling them young master from the main entrance. Caesar was naturally surrounded by the employees. He lazily looked around with his big eyes as if he was about to fall asleep. When they passed by the third floor, Caesar's eyes lit up slightly. He saw a slender and seductive familiar figure mixed in with the employees. Black Widow Natasha. Chapter 358. The woman looked to be around 28 years old. She had a tall nose, bright red lips, and short dark red hair that draped over her shoulders, perfectly revealing her delicate earlobes and collarbones. She was wearing a mature female uniform, and just her curves alone were enough to make people blush, not to mention the seductive snow-white cleavage that was exposed in front of her chest. She catwalked down the corridor, and when she saw Caesar and the others, she threw a flirtatious glance in their direction, then shook her hair and disappeared around the corner of the elevator. Who is she? Eddie touched his nose. He felt like he had seen this woman somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. The poison that was normally active in his body was now silent as if it was hibernating. Humph, you men like this kind of woman? Annie, who was walking in front, snorted. As a woman, it seemed like she didn't have a good impression of this kind of sexy woman. She said with a bit of dissatisfaction, "She's not from our company. She's just a legal secretary of a partner company. She probably has a project to discuss with the deputy manager. She's been coming to our office building a lot these days." Caesar nodded thoughtfully. Although the woman had put on makeup and looked different from before, he recognized her the moment he saw her. The Black Widow Natasha. After all, she was a talent that he had poached from the Red Room organization. Later, under the name of Family Cal, she was lent to SHLD, which was managed by Fry. No matter how he looked at it, she was one of them, so there was no way he would mistake her. Natasha was here, which meant that SHLD had attached great importance to the recent situation of Stark Industries. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent Natasha, who was half a hero, to investigate. Natasha was now the bridge between SHLD and the Avengers. Coupled with her third identity in Family Cal, the power behind her was simply terrifying. Caesar's eyes didn't stay on Natasha for long. It was just a casual glance. Not to mention other people's suspicions, even Natasha didn't know that her identity had been exposed. Assistant manager? Caesar muttered softly. 9 out of 10 people who were targeted by Natasha would suffer, and one would be very unlucky. Annie didn't dare to be negligent and turned to look at Caesar. She then asked with a slight smile, "Young Master is so young, you must not know about the current situation of Stark Industries." Caesar nodded. Without the vice by his side, collecting information would not be as easy as when he was in his original body. Annie wondered where she should start. After thinking for a while, she earnestly said, "Half a year ago, Stark Industries operated according to the instructions of Chairman Stark Tani." Annie patted her forehead and didn't waste her love for him. She said seriously, "The deputy manager is called Aldrich Killian. He's a Jew. He's an extremely smart biological scientist, but he doesn't have the quirks of a genius. He treats people very well." Aldrich Killian? Caesar was slightly stunned. This name gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Now, only the heroes and villains that appeared in the original work could leave some traces in his mind. Before he thought too much, Eddie, who was driving, asked curiously, "What about the general manager?" You don't even know the general manager? Annie rolled her eyes at Eddie. She had a completely different attitude towards Eddie and Caesar. She said with a slightly cold face, "The general manager is the former Mr. Stark Tawny's personal secretary, Pepper Potts. She's mainly responsible for the human resources and operations of the industry." "I actually know her." Eddie's eyes widened. If he had known that Miss Potts was the general manager, he wouldn't have been unable to enter the industry's office building just now. Potts and Yu Tong didn't interact very frequently, but they did interact quite often. "Okay, it's decided." Caesar flicked his little finger lightly. After eating the candy, the remaining candy flew a few meters and accurately threw it into the trash can in the corridor. "Young master, what is it now?" Aid asked nervously when he heard that. Caesar ignored him and said to Annie, "Annie, bring us to the general manager's office." With Caesar's status, he naturally gave the green light all the way. Under Annie's guidance, they went straight to the general manager's office. Potts had already received the smart notification, but due to work, she didn't rush downstairs in time. So when Caesar came to her office, she was so excited that she didn't have a dignified demeanor. She rushed forward and hugged Caesar, who hadn't spoken yet. "Tawny, you can't blame me for this." Caesar's little face was covered by her towering chest. He held his breath and helplessly shouted in his heart. Chapter 359. Inside the general manager's office. Caesar was finally released after Potts intimately rubbed his face and body. He sat down on the office chair seriously and waved his hand at Eddie. "Eddie, go outside first. I have something to say to Miss Potts." "Yes, young master." Eddie was also very straightforward as he turned around and walked towards the office door. Potts looked at Caesar with incomparable surprise and then looked at Eddie's back. She originally thought that it was just Eddie bringing Caesar for a stroll. She didn't expect that Caesar would be the one in charge. Actually, if it was anyone else, they would intuitively think that Caesar was just a child when they saw him. After all, he was really too young. Even if he said that he had mature thoughts and ideas, not many people would believe it. "You are?" Potts' beautiful eyes moved and her gaze turned to Annie, who was still in the office. There were too many employees in Stark Industries. Even the office workers were counted in the thousands. She really couldn't remember a new employee who worked in the same building. Annie was a little nervous as she respectfully bowed and said, "Hello, General Manager. I'm a junior employee of the 3rd Operation Department who has been here for less than half a month. My name is Annie Weiing." "Annie Weiing?" Potts suddenly said, "I've seen this name before. Right, yesterday you and another employee were attacked by criminals at night." "Yes. This is all thanks to young Master Caesar. If it wasn't for him taking care of those criminals, I'm afraid I would have already—" Annie shuddered when she recalled last night. She looked at Caesar, who was sitting on the chair, with incomparable gratitude. When Potts heard her words, she couldn't help but cover her slightly open mouth with her hand to hide her shock. After silently digesting the information for a few seconds, she instructed Annie and Eddie to wait outside the door together. Annie hurriedly nodded and walked out of the office in her high heels, closing the door behind her. Only Potts and Caesar were left in the office. They stared at each other in silence for a while before Potts sighed. "Half a year ago, when Kale's godfather brought you to Tawny's villa, you were barely the size of a football. Now you've grown so big. How is this considered big?" Caesar's mouth twitched. He raised his hands and looked at his small white arms. "By the way, did you just call me Miss Potts?" Potts raised her pretty face in dissatisfaction. She sat on the office chair and crossed her long legs that were wrapped in black stockings. Caesar spread out his hands. "Then what should we call them?" Potts smiled and suggested, "Yu Tong and I are very close. We are as close as sisters. Why don't you call me Aunt?" "No." Caesar was unusually firm in his opposition. "That's true. Your godfather's child. Calling me that would mess up the seniority. Then call me Pepper." Potts was a little helpless. Kale's seniority was too high. She reckoned that no one would be able to surpass Caesar. "Okay." Caesar nodded. "My young master, why are you running outside instead of staying at home? New York is not as safe as it used to be." Potts' words had a hidden meaning. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. It was obvious that the negative news about Stark Industries and the attack on her employees had drained her mentally and physically. "Sure enough, do you still think I'm a child?" Caesar sighed slightly and stood up from the chair without thinking too much. Under Potts' incredulous gaze, he ignored gravity and the laws of physics and floated up like a balloon. No matter how persuasive words were, it was better to use actual performance to prove it. "Pepper." After flying around the room, Caesar held the back of his head with both hands and lay in the empty air. He looked down at Potts and said seriously, "If Stark Industries has any problems, you can tell me directly. Tani isn't here, so the industrial matters should be handled by our family cow." If it wasn't for his youthful appearance and childish tone, he would have been convincing enough. Potts took a deep breath and looked up at Caesar in the air. She exclaimed, "I should say as expected of your family. Longevity, superpowers, and so on are like natural inheritances to you guys." Caesar smiled. "It should be our family. Won't you be one of us in the future?" Potts' face flushed red. She said angrily, "You even know how to tease me. You don't have the seriousness and majesty of Kale's godfather at all." "Am I not Kale? It's just that I've changed my body and identity." Caesar rolled his eyes. Unlike his original body, his current baby body didn't have any burden on his image at all. However, after a short conversation, not only did Potts become much closer to Caesar, but she also completely threw away her prejudice against him due to his age and saw him as a mature person of the same age. Then let's get back to the main topic. Potts began to tell Caesar about the recent situation in the industrial industry. It was similar to what she learned from Eddie and Annie. In the end, she hesitated and said, "Several of the missing employees were from the new product development department that the deputy manager was in charge of." "You suspect that there's something wrong with him," Caesar said. Potts flipped her hair. "It's not just me. HLD is also suspicious, but they haven't found any evidence." Caesar understood. That was why Natasha came in disguise and took the opportunity to get close to the deputy manager. She wanted to find some evidence and clues from him. Potts sighed and said, "Aldrich Killian is a gentleman. He does things flawlessly. He's a top scientist in the field of biology and weapons manufacturing. If it wasn't for the recent situation, I really didn't want to suspect him." Stark Industries, which had lost Iron Man Tani, wasn't something that could be easily taken over by ordinary people. "Don't worry. Since I'm here, all the problems are no longer problems." Caesar smiled. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. His childish little face was full of confidence. "What do you want to do?" Potts was infected by his confidence and asked with slight anticipation. Caesar landed on the table and stretched out a finger. "It's very simple. You just need to let the people from SHLD continue to monitor the deputy manager called Killian as usual. It doesn't matter even if they find out." "And then?" Potts blinked. "Secondly, give me the location where the employees were attacked." Caesar stretched out a second finger and said with certainty, "Next, you just need to wait for news from my side." They didn't stay in the general manager's office for long. After Caesar finished giving instructions, he left Stark Industries with Eddie. They rushed to a nearby street before the sky turned dark. Downtown New York, beside 958 South Road. There were still some police cordons that hadn't been taken down. The floor and walls of the alley had burn marks, and the charred outlines of several people could be vaguely seen. The scene was very frightening under the bright red sunset. "Young master, what are we doing here?" The police, forensics, SHLD, and even Family Cal's people have all been here. They didn't find any clues. Eddie scratched his head and asked Caesar, who was on his shoulder, in confusion. Caesar's gaze locked onto the burned area where the employees were attacked. The feeling of being in control of the situation returned. He replied in a bad mood, "What do you know? What I see is different from what you see." He could ignore the limitations of the human eye and directly see the original essence of the world. Chapter 360. Caesar looked at the sealed burning site in front of him. He patted Eddie's head lightly and jumped down. However, before his feet touched the scorched ground, he stopped at a low altitude under the control of some mysterious force. "Young master, what are you doing?" Eddie widened his eyes in confusion. However, after Caesar waved his hand, he could only stand still and watch. Caesar was suspended in the air 10 centimeters above the ground. It was as if he was stepping on the empty air floor. He walked step by step to the center of the burning site. Dusk gradually faded away, and the sky above their heads was dark blue. The curtain of night quietly enveloped the city. The street lamps on both sides of the street turned on after a sizzling sound, and the slightly dim light fell on the alley and walls that were full of burn marks at the scene. Eddie narrated softly as if he was narrating, "This is the first location of the crime. Just 3 days ago, 2 R&D employees of Stark Industries were returning home. When they passed by here, they were attacked by unknown people. At that time, the only public camera in this area was broken. Someone called the police 10 minutes later. However, when the police arrived at the scene, the area within 10 meters of the scene was scorched black as if it had been burned by a raging fire. For the time being, it was determined that it was caused by an explosive with a high explosive effect. Therefore, no evidence or clues could be found. You said that 2 employees were attacked, but why are there only 3 figures here? Caesar pointed at the scorched wall with his little finger. There were 3 vague silhouettes, which were imprinted on the wall as proof of their existence. There are rumors that the 3rd figure belongs to an evil spirit or a ghost. Eddie spread his hands and said casually. I've seen evil spirits and souls, but they're not like this. Caesar's little face turned cold. He revealed a maturity and steadiness that was beyond his age. He lowered his head and scanned the scene. The area below him was reflected in his bright eyes. He could observe everything in detail and subjectively. In fact, he could not only predict the short-term future, the residue at the scene, the burn marks, the microparticles in the air. After compiling all the information he saw into data, Caesar's brain was like a supercomputer with the constant supply of energy in his body. It used various equations and ideas to deduce what had happened in the past. Soon, those scenes that existed in the past appeared before Caesar's eyes one by one as if time was flowing backward. As expected. After a while, Caesar nodded thoughtfully, and a strange smile appeared on her small mouth. Young master, what did you see? Eddie scratched his head in confusion. He couldn't figure out what was going on, and there was nothing he could do about the poison in his body. It formed a strong visual impact of muscles and shells. He squatted down and then stomped on the ground with both feet. With a leap that was full of impact, several cracks appeared on the cement ground, and circles of white dust spread outwards like waves. Eddie's 2-meter-tall black armored body shot out like a missile. During this time, he flexibly used the forest of buildings as pedals and chased after Caesar, who was flying at supersonic speed. 10 minutes later. Charming bar queens. The loud explosive sound in the inner ballroom shook the eardrums. Under the colorful flashing neon lights, a group of mature and beautiful girls and shirtless men were dancing freely. The waitresses in sexy clothes came and went with drinks from time to time. The black-haired young man pushed the door and entered. He let the sound hit him and lowered his head to the boy sitting on his shoulder. He sighed and said, Young master, can you slow down next time? You don't have to be like this even if you're in a hurry, right? It was Eddie and Caesar. The 2 of them crossed more than 10 kilometers in a short time and arrived at another jurisdiction in New York. Don't talk nonsense. He's in here. Caesar looked at the crowd in the bar's ballroom coldly. The 4th criminal who attacked Stark's employees. Eddie whispered seriously. He raised his spirits, pushed people away with both hands, and began to go deeper into the crowded ballroom. When the surrounding customers saw the pair of Eddie and Caesar, they looked at them strangely from time to time. It was normal for a man to bring a girl to this event, and sometimes people would bring pets. However, it was the first time that a man brought a child to this event. Chapter 361. Inside the bar's ballroom. The trendy music was like a wave of sound, crashing into the men and women who were crazily twisting their bodies inside. The neon lights on the ceiling made them look like colorful beasts, throwing themselves into the music to release the stress of the day's work, or looking for food to satisfy the primitive lust of the lower half of their bodies. Eddie pushed through the crowd with his hands with some difficulty, and with great difficulty, merged into the cheering and dancing crowd. Caesar sat steadily on Eddie's left shoulder, and no matter how he walked, there was no sign of him falling. His small hand held a small piece of metal that was suspected to have been dropped by the attacker, and his large eyes coldly scanned the front. We're close. Some animals that evolved in a different direction could find their target through their nose or eyes that were far superior to humans, not to mention Caesar, who had extraordinary facial features. As long as the criminal was still alive in this world, there would be no way for them to escape from his hunt. Caesar ordered, Toxin, use your perception to see if there are any humans around here who have energy beyond that of ordinary adults. Yes, young master. Toxin was far more tactful than Eddie, and knew who had the biggest card at the moment, so he immediately agreed and skipped over Eddie to use his perception. Fence-sitter, Eddie cursed under his breath, but became more serious as he scanned the unfamiliar faces with a patrolling gaze. Just as the 3 of them fully activated their perception and detection, a pleasantly surprised female voice rang out from behind them. Ah, what a coincidence. Caesar turned around and saw a blonde girl squeezing out of the crowd. Her delicate face was beautifully made up, and her lips were red and her skin was white. She wore a white tube-top dress that only reached her knees, and her youthful and charming curves were fully displayed. Eddie also turned around, and when he saw the youthful and charming blonde, he sighed as if he had stepped in dog poop. "Why is it you again?" Caesar also found it strange that the person in front of him was Annie Wei-ing. He didn't know if her luck was good or bad to run into them everywhere. The first time, Caesar had saved her. The second day, he had run into her again in the office building of Stark Industries. This time, he had run into her again when he was chasing the criminal to Queens. "Why can't it be me?" Annie snorted with her hands on her hips. Before she could explain, two other beautiful women squeezed out from behind her. "Annie, did you meet someone you know?" one of the blonde girls asked, while the other red-haired girl covered her mouth and snickered. They were all around 25 years old and their beauty was rare. Each of them had their own characteristics, and they were dressed in beautiful dresses that showed off their figures. When they stood together, they attracted the burning gazes of many men around them. Caesar blinked. It was another familiar face and an old one at that. One was Jane Foster, Thor's long-distance girlfriend, and the other was naturally her good friend, Lucy Louise, the intellectual woman who had confessed to his main body half a year ago. 3 missing 1. Did they have enough people to play mahjong tonight? Annie waved her hand and didn't even look at Eddie. She stared straight at Caesar, who was on his shoulder, and said softly, "These are my 2 good friends from university, Jane Foster and Lucy Louise. Come out and meet them after work tonight." "Nice to meet you." "What a cool guy." Jane and Lucy both mistakenly thought that Annie was introducing them to Eddie, so they didn't put on any pretense and took the initiative to shake hands with Eddie with smiles on their faces. "Just call me Eddie," Eddie responded with a smile. Annie looked at him with dissatisfaction and warned, "I'm telling you, don't even think about hitting on the 2 of them. Jane has a violent boyfriend. As for Lucy, she already has someone she likes. No matter what, it won't be your turn." "Annie, what are you talking about? I don't have a boyfriend. If there's someone suitable, I don't mind falling in love." Jane's face was cold. It was obvious that Thor's disappearance had made her very unhappy for the past 6 months. That boyfriend she picked up might have died in the divine realm, right? Jane thought angrily and worriedly. Lucy, on the other hand, lowered her head shyly. Her charming face was tinged with a faint pink, looking even more tempting to commit a crime. "By the way, who is this child?" After chatting for a while, Jane and Lucy quickly noticed Caesar on Eddie's shoulder. They both widened their eyes and asked in surprise. Annie said with a smile, "His identity will definitely give you a big shock." Before she could finish, Eddie suddenly trembled. The poison in his body had an urgent notification. "Target found. Eddie, there's a man about 5 meters to your left. He's wearing a leather jacket and a black hat. He has an energy value that exceeds that of a normal human." Eddie glanced sideways and saw a tall man wearing a leather jacket and a hat. He had his back to them and seemed to be leaving towards the back corridor of the ballroom. "Young master, you stay here. I'm going to catch the target." Eddie finished quickly and immediately took Caesar off his shoulder and stuffed him directly into Annie's arms. Then he buried his head in the crowd and chased after the target man. "What are you going to do?" Annie subconsciously hugged Caesar tightly and looked at Eddie's back with Jane and Lucy in surprise. Caesar muttered discontentedly, "That guy, why is he in such a hurry? Also, he won't leave me behind as a burden, will he?" On the other side, the target man was in front and Eddie was chasing closely behind. The 2 of them kept leaving the ballroom and finally arrived at the deserted back corridor where there were few customers. "Where are you going?" Eddie took a big stride and closed the final distance. When he was close to the target man's back, he reached out and put his hand on his shoulder. "I should be the one asking you this question." The target snorted coldly. He didn't have any intention of escaping. His body sank and twisted, and he instantly got rid of Eddie's palm. Then he stretched out his hands at lightning speed and used a counterattack technique to restrain Eddie's left arm. Eddie was shocked and tried to pull his arm back. However, the opponent's hands had an inhuman strength, like a pair of iron pliers. His ordinary body could not break free no matter how hard he tried. At this time, the target man spoke into the microphone on his collar again calmly, "You can do it now." "Oh no, they have help." Eddie was a little panicked and hurriedly said, "Toxin, hurry up and help." "Do I need you to tell me that?" Toxin responded hoarsely. The next moment, black liquid appeared on Eddie's chest. The target man's blue pupils contracted slightly. With his inhuman reaction, before he could react, the black liquid condensed into a monster's claw and slapped him heavily. Bah! The target man flew out without warning, directly smashing through the wooden back door behind him, and rolling 10 meters out on the street along with the broken wood shavings. Go. Eddie's whole body was covered in the poisonous liquid. He turned into a black monster that was born purely for battle. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a cold light. He rushed out violently. His huge body made of muscle fibers broke through the walls around the back door. Accompanied by a wave of dust, he attacked the target man who was still lying on the ground. Whoosh, a modified mechanical arrow flashing a small red light, suddenly pierced into the battlefield from a nearby street building, trying to block Eddie's attack. Eddie, who was covered in poison, did not care and chose to ignore it. However, when the arrow fell on his body, it turned into a high-explosive grenade and caused a powerful explosion. Chapter 362. Late at night in a secluded street behind the bar. Boom. A dazzling burst of fire suddenly exploded, and the explosive wave instantly covered the rampaging Eddie completely. Strong winds surged and slapped the surrounding open area in a disorderly manner. The target was relieved that the crisis was over. He knelt on the ground and struggled to get up with one hand. He gave a thumbs up in the direction of the rooftop. Well done. On the rooftop of the building, a mysterious man with a special bow in his hand and a quiver of arrows on his back was squatting on the 10-meter-high wall. He looked down at the area below with a pair of sharp, dark eyes. Just when he thought he had successfully killed the target and was about to put down the bow, a sharp and terrifying roar suddenly came from the explosion. The expression of the target man changed drastically as well. He raised his head and saw a huge black shadow rushing out of the dust. Its tough muscles and shell were black and shiny. It was not damaged at all when it was hit by an explosion that was even more powerful than a high-explosive grenade. Furthermore, it continued to launch a violent and powerful attack forward. This monster, is it Hulk's brother? The target man did not have time to think. After all, Eddie was already in front of him and was swinging his fists down. He could only roll on the ground like a fish in a sorry state, narrowly avoiding the monstrous punch that was covered in poison. But the concrete floor of the street was not so lucky. Under the impact of the amazing punch, it immediately shattered and cracked like a piece of tofu, collapsing into a hole with a radius of 1 meter. If one looked at the center, one could even see the underground sewer. The target man rolled a few times to avoid the attack. With his hands on the floor, he jumped up with a beautiful bounce. He looked at the shocking fist pit not far away and swallowed his saliva. He stabilized the cap on his head and said helplessly into the communication microphone, "If I had known, I would have brought Banner here. He is good at dealing with such a character." "He's here? Maybe things will get worse." The man with the bow snorted in response. Aid's eyes flashed with a pale, cold light. He knew that the man had an accomplice, so he wanted to end the battle as soon as possible. He took a few steps forward in a frenzy, and with a leap, he turned into a blurry black shadow and flew out. As he closed the distance between them, he opened his fan-sized palms and slapped the man from both sides. The palms were so fast and powerful that they formed a small area of strong air pressure and whistling wind. If the palms hit, not to mention a human, even an elephant would be smashed into a pile of meat paste. Looking at Eddie's tall body getting closer and closer, the target stood straight in a military posture. His broad and perfect body and confident temperament made him look like a big white poplar tree. He wasn't fighting by himself. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, in the blink of an eye, Eddie was about to kill one of them when he heard a soft sound again. It was the special sound effect of several arrows flying through the air at high speed. No, it was not arrows. Bows and arrows were just cold weapons. However, the thing that flew towards him was clearly a grenade. Eddie had no intention of dodging. He glanced at it from the corner of his eyes and suddenly opened his mouth to bite the top of his head. With 2 cries of disbelief, all 3 arrows made of special materials were sucked into his mouth. After closing his mouth, Eddie's cheeks swelled up violently. However, they quickly returned to normal. He opened his mouth slightly and spat out a few rounds of smoke. If they wanted to hurt him, who was covered in poison, they could only use high-end weapons such as missiles. Low-end weapons such as guns or grenades were too weak. They could only scratch his itch. Due to the explosive arrows, Eddie only paused for a moment. Then he continued to close in on the target. His black palms were already raised high like the deadly scythe of the Grim Reaper. "Captain?" At the critical moment, a woman's voice suddenly interrupted the battle. At the same time, a round object was thrown at the target like a dart. "You forgot to bring something." The target man's eyes lit up slightly. He reacted quickly and accurately to catch the round object. Then he raised it with both hands. It was clearly a one-handed round shield. Under the dim light, it reflected the blue and red striped graffiti. It blocked Eddie's fierce slap from above by a hair's breadth. Boom. Facing the impact of more than 10 tons of pure strength, the target with the round shield did not fall. He knelt on one knee and supported himself on the ground. The muscles all over his body swelled up. His baseball cap was blown away by the shockwave. The strong wind blew the garbage and wallpapers around the street, until the impact force was completely absorbed by the round shield. Eddie was surprised. He took 3 steps back and put some distance between them. The target stood up with his head held high. He held the round shield with his left hand. After losing his baseball cap, his bright blonde hair and handsome young face were exposed. Together with his golden ratio body, he was like a living statue of a soldier. Gotcha. A steel cable was thrown down from the rooftop of the building. Then, a male agent in a black uniform with black eyes and a special bow slid down. He was agile and nimble. He landed lightly on the street and stood side by side with the man with the shield. Thud, thud. A pair of high-heeled boots stepped on the concrete floor. From the other side of the street, a beautiful woman with short dark red hair walked out. She was wearing a one-piece leather suit that revealed her curves to the fullest. She held 2 silver pistols in each of her hands and stood next to the man with the shield. The 3 of them stood together like a golden triangle. They looked at Eddie coldly and vigilantly. "Am I late, Captain?" A clear eagle whistle sounded in the night sky. A black man with a pair of mechanical wings hovered low in the air. He quickly retracted his wings and landed on the ground. He stood side by side with the man with the shield. "You're not late." The man with the shield smiled and looked at Eddie, who was alone. He said in a deep voice, "Now it's 4 against 1. The other 3 stared at AID in unison, as if they were going to attack him from all sides if he didn't agree with them. Eddie looked at the familiar faces in front of him and shrugged helplessly. He sighed and said, "I think this is a misunderstanding. Captain Steve, Miss Natasha. The other 2 should be Falcon and Hawkeye, the new members of the Avengers." The 4 people standing opposite of each other were confused. "Toxin, deactivate your combat mode." As Eddie spoke, the black armor on his body melted and disintegrated, turning into black liquid that retracted back into his body. In just 3 seconds, he returned to his original appearance of a normal human youth. "A temporary worker from the unnatural firm? Eddie, it's you?" Steve and Natasha looked at each other. They had been to the Dehao Tower and recognized Eddie at a glance. He was the temporary worker who had served them last time, but they had never seen him in his shape-shifted form. "I came to the bar with the young master to look for criminals. I misunderstood you, Captain Steve. That's why I attacked you." Eddie smiled bitterly. Steve and the others were speechless. They came here to look for criminals. When they saw Eddie attacking, they thought he was a criminal. Both sides made the same mistake. It was like a flood rushing against the Dragon King's temple. They fought for a long time, but in the end, they fought each other. Chapter 363. Wait a minute. Steve suddenly remembered something and stared straight at Eddie. His eyebrows furrowed as he said in a deep voice, "Who did you say you were accompanying?" "Family Cal's young master," Eddie replied without hesitation. Natasha nodded and muttered, "Now that you mention it, I did see you bring the young master to inspect the company in the office building of Stark Industries during the day. I heard that you even stayed in the general manager's office for half an hour. However, you left the young master alone in the bar's dance hall?" Natasha couldn't help but widen her beautiful eyes when she said this. "It seems like..." Eddie suddenly realized and turned around. Only then did he realize that catching the criminals was secondary. The main content of the mission was to protect Caesar's personal safety. At this time, if the criminals were not the 2 of them, then they must still be hiding in the bar. Is young Master Caesar in danger? The faces of the Avengers changed. They followed Eddie and were about to break in through the broken back door. However, in the next moment, there was a burst of dense and complicated screams from inside the dance hall. Immediately after, there was a man's scream that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. The wall of the bar's back street collapsed. Along with the explosion of rubble and dust, a middle-aged man's figure was caught in the middle. He miserably rolled in front of Eddie and the others. The middle-aged man was lying on the ground with his face facing the sky. One of his arms was exaggeratedly broken. The remaining arm was strangely flashing red and emitting white smoke. His palm seemed to have turned into an object with a temperature that exceeded 1,000 degrees. One could directly see the burning red blood vessels and muscles inside. Steve and the others were on high alert. He was in so much pain that his eyes rolled back and he fainted. The red and high temperature on his arm gradually disappeared. This is. Before the Avengers could react, there was another heavy sound from the broken back door and the outer wall of the bar. Then a second bald man quickly flew out in the air. Without the buffer of the wall, the bald man flew through the air in a line that was as long as 10 meters. Finally, his head hit the wall of the alley opposite the bar and he died on the spot. His hands also showed signs of high temperature. His muscles and skin had disintegrated and melted. Sticky blood dripped from his dangling fingers like lava and sizzled as it corroded the cement floor. The whole process happened in 3 seconds. When Steve and the others came to their senses, the two hidden criminals were already lying on the ground, one dead and one injured. What's going on? Steve looked at the prisoners on the ground and then looked at the bar where the customers were fleeing. Even though he had a lot of combat experience, he was a little surprised and confused. The others weren't much better off than him. They all looked at the bar with a blank expression. Don't worry. AID waved his hand calmly, sighed and said, "If I'm not wrong, this is all done by my young master." The Avengers were in a mess. Eddie was right this time. This was all because of Caesar. If they wanted to know the cause and effect, they had to rewind the time back to 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago. Eddie and Steve fought because of a misunderstanding. After they left the bar from the back door, Caesar could only stay with Annie, Jane, and Lucy in the bar's ballroom. If it was any other man, it might be an extremely luxurious fortune. Unfortunately, with the current age and development of Caesar's clone, even if he had the heart, he didn't have the physical capital to do what adults like to do. Caesar was in Annie's arms. His big eyes looked around the noisy ballroom. So cute. Jane smiled brightly at Caesar. She stepped forward and wanted to touch his short blonde hair. However, she was stopped by Caesar's small hand halfway. Not to mention Thor's girlfriend, even Thor's mother didn't have the right to touch his head. Caesar thought coldly. His small face was so cold and mature that he didn't look like a baby. He controlled his strength and gently slapped Jane's hand away. Don't mind it. Annie hurriedly smoothed things over. Jane was stunned. She awkwardly retracted her hand. Lucy patted her shoulder comfortingly. Lucy looked at Caesar with her beautiful eyes. For some reason, she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity from his small body. On a whim, she blinked and said, "Annie, didn't you say that his identity would scare us? Why don't you introduce him?" Well, Annie looked down at Caesar. She actually wanted to ask him what he thought about this. This made Jane and Lucy feel even more incredulous. Caesar nodded at Annie. There was nothing to hide about his identity. He was eager to let some people know about it and come all the way here just to kill them. Annie only said happily after getting permission, "His name is Caesar Carl. He's the son of the symbol of peace, Mr. Kale. He was rumored to be the best candidate for hero half a year ago, the son of God." Mr. Kale's child? Jane and Lucy were really shocked. They almost exclaimed out loud. Jane was purely shocked. Other than shock, Lucy was also filled with joy, sadness, relief, and many other emotions. She still couldn't forget that man easily. Lucy sighed in her heart. She looked at Caesar with scorching love and tenderness. Caesar was experienced. Naturally, he knew what she was thinking. He purposely turned his face away and looked at the people who were dancing to the song. At this moment, two men were talking and laughing. They walked towards them intentionally or unintentionally. Their eyes wandered around the graceful bodies of Annie and the other two girls. Their deep-set eyes revealed a beast-like desire from time to time. Annie and Jane were still chatting. Apparently, they didn't notice the approaching danger from the side. Caesar frowned slightly. He closed his eyes and quickly opened them again. A white light flashed in his eyes, and the scene in his vision changed drastically again. He looked at Jane and Lucy, who were opposite him. His gaze directly penetrated their dresses and underwear and saw their naked bodies. This was just the beginning. Soon his gaze went deeper. The medical equipment clearly penetrated the human skeleton, the internal organs, and the dense blood vessels. Caesar was shocked. In his eyes, Jane and Lucy had turned into two moving skeletons. The heart in the left chest was still beating in the skeleton. It was a hair-raising sight. This was the Kryptonian's eyes. In addition to telescopic and microscopic vision, this was the third manifestation of the superpower, X-ray. Caesar glanced sideways and saw that the two men with bad intentions had also turned into two skeletons. However, unlike ordinary people, their internal organs were like flames. Their biological energy was trying to suppress the burning flames. These two were the criminals who attacked Stark's employees. "Who is Eddie chasing?" Caesar whispered helplessly. Seeing the two criminals approaching, he immediately patted Annie's arm. Annie subconsciously let go of her hands. In less than 0.1 seconds, Caesar disappeared from her arms. A few meters was nothing to Caesar. It was like teleportation. Caesar appeared above the two criminals in the blink of an eye. The two criminals were shocked. Their reaction was faster than ordinary people. They raised their arms to attack or defend. Their palms glowed with a scorching red temperature as if some kind of switch had been turned on. The temperature rose sharply, and the ballroom in the bar suddenly became hot. Chapter 364. Caesar narrowed his eyes as he watched the two criminals reach out to grab him. The two pairs of hands quickly heated up, and the temperature instantly exceeded 100 degrees Celsius. It continued to rise until it was close to 1000 degrees Celsius, which was unbearable for human bodies. In his superhuman eyes and senses, the flow of time in the world was slowing down. Annie and the other two girls were panicking behind him. The surrounding customers were screaming and trying to escape the scene. There were also the two criminals who were both terrified and angry. Everything in the ballroom slowed down slightly. That was not all. Caesar could also see that the blood in the two criminals' bodies was rapidly evaporating. Under the guidance of some modified genes, the biological energy was converted into a scorching energy source that was transmitted from their muscles and bones to their arms. Modified humans, huh? Interesting. Caesar blinked as he slowly reached out his small fair hands towards the two pairs of scorching red palms. Bah, bah. The flow of time returned to normal. Caesar, who was floating in the air, used one of his small hands to block the two criminals' close combat attacks. The size of his small hands was completely disproportionate to the size of his big hands. Even so, Caesar was still able to easily block the two burly men's attacks. "You're asking for it." The two criminals were not shocked. Instead, they were overjoyed. Their faces were red as they held on to Caesar's small hands. They were still trying to restrain their energy. Soon, their entire arms were as red as fire, and their sleeves had long been burned to ashes. They wanted to melt Caesar's hands with high temperature. The temperature was high, and the heat waves were rolling. The customers in the bar and dance hall had never seen such a battle before. They screamed and retreated, leaving an empty space for the three of them. Only Annie and the other two girls were still standing at the edge of the space, looking at Caesar in the battle anxiously. Compared to everyone else on the scene, Caesar, who was fighting 1 against 2, was unperturbed. His small face was as cold as before, and his small hands, which were as slender as lotus roots, were tightly held by the burning palms of the two criminals. Caesar did not use any strength. He quietly floated in the air and looked at the criminals who were trying to restrain their energy. He looked at them as if they were idiots. "Why is it not working?" The bald man among them was shocked. The temperature had reached the critical point of their production, 1500 degrees Celsius. Even steel should have melted by now. But the small hand that was fighting with the criminal's palms was still cold and showed no signs of damage. Was he still a human? The bald man looked up at Caesar, who was smiling. His body was hot, but his back was cold. He could not speak at all. Of course he did not know. Kryptonians' bodies of steel, even solar energy, were used as nutrients for their food. Their skin was resistant to extremely high and low temperatures. Not to mention that the temperature was less than 2000 degrees Celsius. "I can't hold on any longer," another man wailed loudly. After the temperature rose to 1500 degrees Celsius, his genetically modified palm could no longer hold on. It could no longer control the temperature, and his body began to disintegrate and fester. Caesar could not help but shake his head. He had let the criminals show the power of the high temperature in order to test the biological modification technology that the terrorist organization had mastered. From the looks of it now, this biotechnology that allowed a human to possess the superpower to convert high-temperature energy into energy was not perfect. Once it went out of control, even the human body would be devoured by the high temperature of the conversion and disintegrate, or even face the consequences of self-destruction. The explosion that attacked the Stark Industries employees should have been caused by the previous biologically modified humans who could not control their superpower and self-destructed. Their palms were as red as iron that had been forged by fire. The two criminals groaned in pain and wanted to retract their hands. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not pull their hands away. They stared at Caesar with their eyes wide open in horror. "Have you had enough fun?" It's time for me to do something, Caesar said as he exerted force with his left hand. With a cracking sound, one of the criminal's arms was broken at a 180-degree angle. The criminal immediately screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Caesar thought it was too noisy, so he pushed him to the side of the inner wall. He used a little more force, so the criminal crashed through the wall and rolled out to the street outside. You can go with him. Caesar looked at the bald man and kicked forward with his small foot. The bald man turned into a ball and flew out in the same direction with a whistling sound. That was the reason why the Avengers saw the two criminals fall to the ground. And this was just the tip of the iceberg of the Kryptonian clone's strength. Facing the waves of dust that had not completely settled, Caesar flew out of the collapsed wall. He was surprised to find Eddie and Steve. He said in surprise, "You guys are fighting aliens together?" Captain America, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Falcon were the main fighting force of the Avengers on Earth since Kale and Iron Man Tony left Earth. Hulk was a double-edged sword, and he should not be released unless it was the end of the world. Natasha looked at Caesar, her beautiful eyes full of disbelief. She whispered, "It's really young Master Caesar. Not only is he so powerful, but he can also fly. Is this thanks to Master Kale's powerful bloodline?" Steve and the others were silent. It was rare for them to go all out, but they were defeated by a junior. It was too embarrassing for the superheroes. "Young Master, did you do this?" Eddie pointed to the dead and injured criminal on the ground. "Of course. I don't know where you went, but they insisted on coming, so I had to take care of them." Caesar spread his hands and looked at the corpse of the bald man whose head was stuck in the wall. He frowned and said to himself, "Huh? One of them is dead? I only kicked him lightly. He really can't take it." Eddie's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He felt injustice for the two criminals. Kicked him lightly? This person had already flown more than 10 meters. It was pure luck that one of them didn't die. Caesar floated in front of everyone and introduced himself. "Hello heroes, nice to meet you. I'm the son of the symbol of peace, Caesar Karl." Natasha smiled and said, "Young Master, many of us have seen you a long time ago. It's just that you were still asleep at that time, and your body was only a little bigger than a palm." Steve put the round shield back on his back and pretended to be serious as he said slowly, "Your father and I are comrades who have gone through fire and water together. You can just call me Captain or Uncle in the future." "Yes, Captain." Caesar laughed in his heart. He pointed at the criminals on the ground and asked directly, "Did you go out for them tonight?" "That's right." Steve nodded. Seeing that there were no outsiders around, he explained, "We found some clues and locked onto these two people. Because we know that they have special abilities, almost all of the Avengers were dispatched to avoid hurting innocent civilians." "Very good." Caesar sighed in relief. He thought that after the main body and Tawny left, there was no one to protect Stark Industries. Now, it was obvious that the Avengers and SHLD had not been fully mobilized. Thinking of this, Caesar said innocently, "Captain, I'll leave the injured one to you. I'll leave the injured criminal to you. I believe that with your methods, you'll be able to obtain more information from him or his mouth. I'm afraid that I won't control my strength properly and kill him." When the heroes heard this, they trembled. They looked at Caesar as if they were looking at a little demon with wings and horns. Chapter 365. The Avengers did not waste their efforts to capture a criminal related to the attack. Steve took the unconscious and seriously injured criminal, and while the city was dark and the police had not arrived, he quickly led the heroes out of the bar area. Before leaving, Steve told Caesar, "Although your father isn't here, you can't be careless in your learning and training of combat skills. Next time, come to the headquarters training ground. I'll be your combat coach and sparring partner." Captain America as a sparring partner? If it were anyone else they might be terrified, but Caesar was not an ordinary person. His big eyes lit up slightly and he agreed without hesitation. He was still unable to perfectly control the strength of his superhuman body. If Captain America could be his sparring partner, it would be the best. After all, where could he find a human sandbag who was proficient in dozens of close-range combat techniques and had a lot of HP and flesh and would not die easily? Eddie had completely entered the role of butler and subordinate. His human body was too weak and his poison was too strong. He was not a suitable sparring partner. After the members of the Avengers left, Caesar told Annie and the other two girls to quickly go home. He then left Queens with Eddie. That night, Caesar's strength was displayed. He cleanly subdued two genetically modified humans, causing many people to be unable to sleep. It was unknown if others were able to sleep, but Caesar's doppelganger was sleeping very soundly. Due to running around for half a day, using energy to fly at the speed of sound and fighting supernatural beings, his small body was so tired that he fell asleep as soon as he laid on the soft bed. It was noon the next day when Caesar woke up. He got up and flew to the bathroom. When he asked Eddie to prepare lunch, Eddie reported two things to him with a serious face. First, late last night the Avengers, led by Captain Steve, were on their way back to us, HLD, with genetically modified criminals. They were attacked by a group of terrorists on their way back. If it was an ordinary terrorist, a hero would have been able to annihilate them. However, the other party was an elite armed team made up of genetically modified humans. They had the advantage in numbers and the incident happened suddenly. The Avengers could only passively defend against the attack. The terrorists were clearly well-trained and under unified command. They only interfered slightly and retreated after one attack. When Steve and the others wanted to counterattack, the terrorists paid the price of two of their companions' self-destruction. They took advantage of the chaos and escaped into the dark night of the bustling city. Throughout the entire process, none of the Avengers were injured. However, the criminals' hostages were killed by the terrorists. Caesar was also very surprised when he heard this. They actually dared to attack the Avengers in downtown New York. This was too bold. More importantly, their goal was obviously perfectly achieved. Although the Avengers were still in the new stage and Kale had left Earth with Tawny. The main internal heroes such as Captain America, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and others were all mid-level combat power between mortals and superhumans. However, not treating heroes as humans was too arrogant and overbearing. Second, it was news about Stark Industries. It was sent by Annie. It also happened late last night. General Manager Pepper Potts mysteriously disappeared. Deputy General Manager Aldrich Killian also disappeared. The disappearance of two important executives of Stark Industries made everyone in Stark Industries panic. Today, Stark Industries shares fell by more than $10 billion when it was published in the newspaper. Although it fell by $10 billion, Stark Industries was still firmly sitting on the top 500 in the world. However, since Iron Man Tawny left, this was the first time Stark Industries had fallen below the trough record. Both of these were bad news that couldn't be any worse. After listening to Eddie's story, Caesar calmly thought about it. It seemed like two different things, but in fact the two were inextricably linked. It could almost be concluded that they were the same thing. If all his guesses were correct, the leader of the terrorists and the inventor of biological genetic modification was Deputy General Manager Killian. Then he really was a formidable villain worthy of praise. Last night, the criminals had just been captured by the Avengers and realized that their identities might be exposed. They simply ordered their underlings to kill the hostages while they gave up their identity and status. They decisively took Pepper Potts captive and took her away. Ruthless and merciless, swift and decisive. They didn't drag their feet or talk nonsense. This was the good cultivation that villains should have. When things reached this point, Caesar wanted to give Killian a thumbs up. However, that was in front of the other party's 3-meter-tall grave. Eddie looked at Caesar and said, "Young master, we should ask Family Cal for help, right? If Boss Yu Tong makes a move, I believe that all problems can be solved." The Black Empress Yu Tong, the queen of the underground world. This was no joke. It was a name that was irrigated by the accumulation of bones and blood. Caesar shook his little head and sneered disdainfully, "This is a small matter. There's no need to trouble Yu Tong. That's your mother." Eddie secretly cursed but didn't dare to say it out loud. He helplessly asked, "Then what should we do?" "What should we do? The Avengers and Stark Industries territory must be recovered, and it must be fast, strong." Caesar's little face was cold. After thinking for a while, he thought of a countermeasure and said, "Eddie, there are a few things that I need to trouble you to do. Please speak." Eddie simply nodded. Caesar's tone was still childish, but there was no doubt in his words. "First of all, I have a plan. First, get in touch with the Dehao building and say that they don't need to do anything about Stark Industries. Just let Yu Tong borrow the Lord God." "Lord God? What's that?" Eddie scratched his head in surprise. In the unnatural firm, he had never heard of the strange name of Lord God. "Pass it on. Yu Tong will understand." Caesar shrugged and continued to say with narrowed eyes, "Second, inform the management of Stark Industries and have them prepare the venue and publicity for the press conference. Announce to the media that the higher-ups of Stark Industries will hold a press conference to the world." "Press conference? And it's the higher-ups of Stark Industries?" Eddie's eyes widened. With a confused expression he tried to ask, "Who?" Caesar's face was indifferent as he pointed at his own nose. This seemed to have touched Eddie's funny bone, causing him to laugh exaggeratedly. After a while, Eddie looked at Caesar's serious little face. The smile on his face froze, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "Young master, what you said can't be true, right? You're going to hold a press conference?" "Nonsense." Caesar crossed his arms and looked at him from the corner of his eyes. He retorted, "Is my identity not enough to represent the higher-ups of Stark Industries?" There was only dim light on the podium, and there was not even half a shadow. The hundreds of media people in the audience could only stare at the empty podium until 12 o'clock sharp. Just when they mistakenly thought that this was just a cover, a few beams of spotlight lit up and shone on the corner of the stage. There, a small figure was finally exposed. Everyone held their breaths and widened their eyes. They saw that it was a little boy of about 1 year old. His short blonde hair was bright and shiny, and his pair of big amber eyes were very beautiful. The facial features on his white and tender little face were exquisite and impeccable. His body was less than half a meter tall, and he was wearing a tailor-made super small suit. Due to his overly mature aura, there was no sense of disharmony when matched with his small body. The little boy had a lollipop in his mouth. His cute face was cold and his short legs moved slowly. He walked from the corner of the large modern glass platform to the podium on stage. The whole venue was silent. Some people were still looking back, thinking that there would be other people on stage. However, after looking for a long time, no one followed except for the little boy. Under everyone's gaze, the little boy walked close to the podium, but because of his height, his body was completely blocked by the podium as soon as he got close. Is he going to perform? Seeing this funny scene, the people in the audience finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. But the next moment, the little boy ignored gravity, flew up, and stood steadily on the podium. This made the eyes of the people in the audience widen in horror, and the laughter also stopped abruptly. "Good morning, everyone." The little boy smiled faintly and didn't have stage fright. He calmly said to the microphone in a childish voice, "Are you very disappointed? I am the senior director of Stark who held this press conference." The people in the audience were even more shocked. They had seen a 100-year-old veteran of World War II, but they had never heard of a 1-year-old senior director of a company. The boy shrugged and said straightforwardly, "Let me introduce myself first. My name is Caesar Carl." Caesar Carl. This name made the audience silent for a while, and then it triggered an uproar like a nuclear explosion. Almost everyone stood up excitedly, and the flashes of the cameras kept flashing one after another. Caesar Carl. This name had caused many heated discussions in society half a year ago. Although it had been quiet for half a year, it was still difficult for people to forget it until now. The descendant of the symbol of peace. The successor of the shares of Stark Industries. The Son of God who had been at the top of the earth since he was born. This was the first time the Son of God had appeared in public. How could people not be excited and look forward to it? They hoped that he could create all kinds of legends like Mr. Kale. "It seems that you all know my identity. That's easy." Caesar smiled and looked down at the crowd below. He said with a cold face, "This press conference is to use the current platform to express a few wishes from my personal standpoint." Some media personnel were very conscious. They simply adjusted the channel and broadcast the press conference live. Caesar said confidently, "From now on, I will officially take over Mr. Tani's heavy responsibility and continue to develop new technological products. Later, I will release a new product concept that transcends the era. It is estimated that it will be mass-produced and sold to the world soon." To take over the work of the genius engineer Tani, there was probably no one in the world who could guarantee that they could do it. But at this time, when the Son of God Caesar said it, it made people feel an indescribable persuasiveness. This was probably also from the strong influence of the symbol of peace. "In addition, I am here to publicly declare war on the terrorists who have been targeting Stark Industries and my friends recently." Caesar was young but domineering. He said faintly, "I only have 2 people here. You can do whatever you want. During this period, I will not borrow the power of the alliance, family, or military. If you can't kill me within a week, then I will uproot you from this blue planet." The clones' counterattack had officially begun. Chapter 367. Son of God, Caesar, makes his debut in front of the world and the public. Shouldering the heavy responsibility of Stark Industries, is it a step into the abyss or a new legend? Son of God, Caesar, who is less than 1 year old, publicly declared war on terrorists alone. Caesar, within 3 days the new Century's product will be announced to the public. Less than half a day after the press conference ended, the news report with the above text as the top headline and Caesar standing on the podium as the cover had already been widely spread by the 21st Century's new online media and additional issues of newspapers and magazines. This undoubtedly set off an epic-level frenzy, triggering an unprecedented heated discussion among the people. Naturally, there were many voices of doubt. After all, Caesar was just a child. However, the voices of support occupied the majority. Those who supported Caesar were basically Caesar's former fans. The saying of, "Love me, love my dog," continued to extend to Caesar. They hoped that Caesar could continue to create heroic miracles and legends, because the world needed heroes too much. Someone commented, regardless of whether Caesar's new product can get Stark Industries out of its commercial predicament, and regardless of whether Caesar can eliminate the terrorists who threaten New York's public security within a week, from the moment he, a 1-year-old child, chose to stand on the podium and shoulder the heavy responsibility without a change in his expression, publicly declaring war, he has already won spiritually. These words triggered the resonance and expectations of thousands of people. At this moment, Stark Industries, near the top of the main office building, the former chairman of Tony Stark's office cum studio. Caesar's small body was lying on the leather sofa, with a lollipop in his mouth, controlling the chair to spin in circles. Eddie, who had changed into a suit, stood in the office hall, looking at Caesar and sighing. "Young master, to be honest, my original expectations were already crazy enough, but I didn't expect that what you did was dozens of times crazier than I expected. I'll just have an alien symbiotic freak freeloading on me. I can occasionally scare and kill people, but I can't turn into Iron Man announcing the product and publicly declaring war. Is this something that the two of us can accomplish?" When Eddie said this, he fidgeted with his hands and kept rubbing his hair. Poison stretched out its tentacles in dissatisfaction and slapped his face, forcing him to calm down a little. Caesar crossed his arms and snorted, "Who asked Tony not to be here? You can only rely on us to do this." Logically speaking, Tony should have been the one to solve the problem. However, Tony in his original body had gone to the Milky Way Alliance. He, the Godfather, would have to take the blame for Tony. Eddie looked at Caesar and asked in surprise, "Why don't we act in secret? Why do they have to hold a press conference with such fanfare? Miss Potts is still in their hands. Do you think I want to?" Caesar glared at him and said, "The enemy is in the dark while we are in the light. If we don't hold a press conference, then the initiative will always be in the hands of the other party." What? Eddie scratched his head and felt that his IQ wasn't enough. Poison felt embarrassed for its host and simply went into a deep sleep without making a sound. "Why do you think the other party did so many things from the beginning to the end?" Caesar asked back. Eddie thought for a while and counted with his fingers as he said, "On one hand, they sent people to infiltrate Stark Industries as the deputy product manager. On the other hand, they attacked the elite R&D employees of Stark Industries and kidnapped Miss Potts after they were afraid that their identities would be exposed." He paused for a moment and his eyes lit up. He got closer to the truth and said, "In addition, other companies in the same industry joined forces to besiege Stark Industries. If these were also done by them, then their ultimate goal should be..." Caesar finished his sentence and nodded. "That's right. They want to destroy the business empire of Stark Industries." Eddie sucked in a breath of cold air and blinked. Did Stark Industries provoke them? As a top company in the development of weapons, the terrorists shouldn't just target Stark Industries, right? Caesar spread his hands and acted as if there was only one truth. He said with certainty, "If I'm not wrong, the person behind the scenes is probably Stark Industries' enemy. The mastermind is most likely Tony's enemy and wants to take revenge on Tony. That's why he thought of destroying his business empire and forcefully taking away his woman." "That's too ruthless." Eddie clenched his fists and felt a bit indignant even though he didn't even have a girlfriend. In fact, Caesar's judgment was not far from the truth. Aldrich Killian, a scientist in the field of biology. More than 10 years ago, at a banquet, Killian was in dire straits because of his research on ultimate biology. He wanted to take the opportunity to get to know the famous Tony Stark. But Tony was a proud genius and a playboy. Only beautiful women could attract his attention at the banquet, so he casually asked the passionate youth Killian to wait for him on the roof of the building. That night, Killian waited on the roof of the banquet building in the rain and the wind for the whole night. His passion and humanity were all worn out, leaving only the anger of revenge. He wanted to take revenge on Stark. Killian wanted to take revenge on Tony after his research on ultimate biology improved. But Tani had already left Earth, so he took the opportunity to sneak into Stark Industries and borrow advanced technology to continue his research on biological genetics. He also deceived Potts, who was Tani's girlfriend and secretary, into trusting him. He cultivated underground terrorist forces and gradually carried out his revenge plan. But because the Avengers moved too quickly, Killian was worried that it would be dangerous to continue staying in Stark Industries, so he decisively kidnapped Potts and hid back in his base. I understand. Eddie recalled what Caesar had said before. Combining it with his current judgment, he said thoughtfully, "Young master, you called a press conference to announce a new product, but in fact, you want to erase the negative status of Stark Industries. This way the enemy's plot to destroy Stark Industries won't succeed. I'll give them a deadline to publicly declare war. In essence, it'll be a mockery and they'll be even more anxious to get rid of me." Caesar smiled and pointed at his own nose. Now, Potts and Stark Industries are no longer their number one target. I, who plays an important role in Stark Industries, am their number one target. I can't believe you can still smile. Eddie looked out the window vigilantly, feeling that the terrorists would attack them at any time. Caesar's lips curled into a sneer, just like a little devil. He said in a childish voice full of murderous intent, "What are you afraid of? I can't wait for them to come to me. If one comes, I'll kill one. If two come, I'll kill two. It's best if all of them come together. I can't be bothered to move a few more times if they get wiped out in one go." Eddie's scalp went numb. He shrunk his neck and threw out his last question. "Young master, the premise for you to help Stark Industries rise is that the new product released is recognized by the public. If the new product is fake, then everything you said before is not valid. Who told you that the product released is fake? It's just that we haven't started making it yet." After Caesar finished speaking, under Eddie's puzzled gaze, he looked at the computer screen on the desk and asked, "Main God, are you ready?" The computer screen suddenly flashed, and the code blocks were pieced together into a ball of data. Then a cold voice came from the speaker. "The artificial intelligence Main God is at your service." Chapter 368. In the field of manufacturing technological products, Caesar would not be able to reach the level of Iron Man Tony Stark by himself, even if his intelligence growth was much higher than the average humans. Tony's almost off-the-charts creative mind and engineering ability was already considered a superpower of a technological branch, and it was a special superpower that could not be copied by the card draw system. However, this did not mean that Caesar could not take over the heavy burden of Stark Industries' technological research and development. He had Lord God, an artificial intelligence that far surpassed the world's technological standards, and he controlled all the top manufacturing factories and resources of Stark Industries and Family Cal. Plus, he had a unique way of thinking from another Earth in his previous life. Caesar only needed to provide the complete product requirements and ideas, and the rest of the theories and research would be left to Lord God to calculate and speculate. Then it would be left to Stark Industries' research and manufacturing team and workers to perfect the manufacturing. At this time in Tony's private office, Caesar was equivalent to the commander-in-chief. He sat on the office desk with computers on and under the desk. The main computer fan and water cooler were trying their best to lower the temperature, and several monitors were lit up with blue screens showing Lord God's unique blue ball logo. The door opened and Eddie stepped in. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve and reported to Caesar while panting, "There should be no problem. The 3 supercomputers in Stark Industries Technology Park are all turned on, and with the 2 from Family Cal, there are a total of 5 supercomputers on standby." Caesar nodded and ordered one of the monitors, "Lord God, let's check it first." "Yes." Lord God responded through the speaker, and a series of data codes flashed across several monitors. After a while, a beeping sound was heard. 5 supercomputers have been successfully connected. You can use their performance and storage to calculate and process data at any time. "Very good." Caesar snapped his fingers. Eddie beside him asked in confusion, "Is it necessary to use 5 supercomputers at once? Are you trying to invade a large country's military database?" "Stop joking. The Lord of Gods doesn't need 2 supercomputers for a military database." Caesar rubbed his hands in annoyance, looking like he was eager to go all out. He smiled meaningfully and said, "I'm afraid that 5 supercomputers are not enough for what we're going to do next." "Then I'll wait and see." Eddie pursed his lips and sat down on a chair. He wanted to see what the little demon Caesar was trying to figure out. Since everything was ready, Caesar didn't dawdle and said directly, "First of all, I'll give you a piece of my mind." Main God, I need to set up a secret database that no one can hack or delete, including Vice and Jarvis. The Lord God didn't even need to use the supercomputer and instantly gave a response plan. It has been solved. The database will be set up in the supercomputer equipment room of the main base. I will set up a firewall and guard it online. No one will have the authority to invade it. Wait, I'm not done yet. Caesar held the stick of the lollipop and tapped it in the air. He said seriously, beyond his age, the storage capacity of the database must be large enough. How large? Please give me an example, the Lord God said coldly, unwilling to admit defeat. Caesar was very straightforward and threw out a shocking condition. It must be able to store the data storage of everything within 10 Earths. Young master, what are you trying to do? Eddie was a little dumbfounded. The Lord God didn't expect it either. The image on the screen froze for a moment. Caesar blinked and said, "It's nothing. It's a super large virtual world. If it's realistic enough, the storage capacity must be large enough." He looked at the screen and asked, "Why you can't do it?" The Lord God didn't answer. After more than 10 seconds of silence, the speaker spoke again. "It has been solved. The storage will be set up in the main base and equipped with a compressed memory chip. It is estimated that it can store the data of everything within 12 Earths. From now on, let K2 modify the main base. It will only take 19 hours. Not bad." Caesar praised him lightly. It was impossible for him to use theory and the current level of technology to research and conquer it. However, the Lord God of artificial intelligence was different. He had the theoretical level of technology from Earth, Wakanda, and planet Sokka. As long as the condition did not exceed a certain level of difficulty, the Lord God could try to calculate and conquer it. Caesar didn't stand on ceremony and made his request according to his idea. "I want a super strong network signal that can cover at least one large city." After half a minute of calculation, the Lord God replied coldly, "It has been solved. Build an alien signal tower in Stark Industries. The network signal will be enough to cover the entire city. The upload speed can reach up to 100 G per second. From now on, it will take 3 days with the manpower of Stark Industries." Caesar thought for a moment and continued, "In addition, there's another thing. Also, build a super large virtual world framework in the database. First, divide it into a few areas to meet the basic system framework that is detached from reality and game fantasy." Caesar talked about this for a long time, including some areas and design ideas of the virtual space. He mainly talked about the effect that he wanted to achieve and left the specific theory and reality to the Lord God to calculate and judge. Not long after, the Lord God analyzed in a very reliable manner. "According to your request, every time we build a perfect, detailed, and realistic virtual world framework, we need 5 supercomputers to calculate and code for 3 days. Take your time, there's no rush." Caesar smiled and comforted the Lord God. Eddie had been confused since just now, but when he heard this he finally understood. He said in surprise, "Young master, your so-called new scientific research product to save Stark Industries is a game? A virtual reality game?" It was the year 2009 of the 21st century. With the popularity of computers, mobile phones, and other electronic products, video games were indeed very popular. However, Stark Industries was going to develop games? No matter what, this was too low class. After all, Stark Industries was the leader of the technology and weapons industry. Sensing Eddie's doubt, Caesar was not angry. He said confidently, "What do you know? What I want to create is not just a game but a world." "A world?" Eddie muttered to himself. He did not understand at that moment. Caesar did not explain further. He said seriously to the Lord God, "Lord God, there's one last technical problem that must be solved. I need to build a device, preferably similar to the model and size of a helmet. It can allow humans to use it as a medium to connect their 5 senses and sensory centers to the virtual space that we create." Eddie was stunned. Connecting everything that happened before, he suddenly realized that an incredible high-tech product was about to be born. The studio was silent. The Lord God did not reply immediately, but data codes kept flashing on the screen. If one was in the supercomputer equipment room, they would definitely see countless chips and hardware heating up rapidly. The water cooling equipment was operating crazily, and a huge data flood was surging on the cable network. After a long time, the Lord God replied, "It's solved. The equipment development is tentatively set as holographic VR helmet technology." Chapter 369. 3 days later. Nearly half a week had passed since Caesar's press conference, and there were only 4 days left before the 1-week deadline that he had previously mentioned. During this time, the city of New York was calm. The terrorists were not in a hurry to attack Caesar, and Caesar did not announce the positioning and concept of the new product. Both sides seemed to be in a standoff and remained silent. The employees of Stark Industries were working overtime these days, as if they were busy researching and developing something. A 30-meter-high iron tower was also built in the inner area of the industry. The specific purpose was unknown. The media wanted to interview some senior personnel, but the senior personnel refused to disclose it on the grounds of confidentiality agreements. Everything fell into the calm before the storm. Due to the appearance of Caesar, the Son of God, Stark Industries stopped the downward trend of collapse. The stock even showed signs of rising, but this was because most people maintained a high level of expectation. Everyone wanted to know if Caesar could replace Iron Man Tony and continue to develop fascinating black technology products. Perhaps even the terrorists hiding in the dark were also watching. At this time, north of the United States, Tennessee, snowflakes as big as goose feathers fell from a height of 10,000 meters with the wind. The city was covered with a layer of thick silver clouds. The fierce cold wind passed through the streets and alleys, making an extremely mournful wailing sound. Located in a luxurious duplex villa on the outskirts of the city, there were armed bodyguards wearing sunglasses both inside and outside the house. A man and a woman were confronting each other in the hall on the first floor where the heater was burning vigorously. The man in a suit and leather shoes was sitting on a leather chair with his legs crossed. He was about 40 years old, with slight wrinkles left by the passage of time on his face. His dark blonde hair was combed back and shiny, and there was a gentle and elegant faint confident smile on his face. About 3 meters across from him, Potts was also sitting on a chair. Her beautiful eyes were fiercely looking at the man in the suit, and her delicate face was full of disgust. The middle-aged man waved his hand, and a blonde beauty immediately came forward to serve him wine. He took a sip of the red wine and said to Potts, "Miss Potts, you don't have to look at me like this. I don't want to hurt you. Maybe we can sit at the table and have a pleasant conversation while drinking wine like before." "Killian, don't pretend to be a gentleman since you've already resorted to these dirty tricks." Potts raised his hands expressionlessly. His fair wrists were shackled and tied to the chair he was sitting on. Killian showed a shocked expression and shouted at the bodyguards beside him, What did you do to the respected Miss Potts? Hurry up and get rid of the chains. There's no need to put on an act." Seeing the bodyguards step forward, Potts coldly glanced at them. Then, he looked at Killian and said calmly, "What do you want to achieve by attacking me in Stark Industries?" "What purpose?" "Of course, it's to personally destroy everything that Tony Stark owns." Speaking of Tony, Jillian finally took off his usual gentlemanly mask. His face was slightly twisted as he said sternly, "Isn't he very arrogant, conceited, and supercilious? I'd like to see what kind of expression he will have when he loses everything." "What you're doing is a crime," Potts responded mercilessly. Killian opened his hands and said matter-of-factly, "So what if it's a crime? As long as you have the strength, you can be above the law. This is what the group of characters called superheroes told me. Unfortunately, you'll never become a superhero." Potts chuckled and looked at Killian with contempt. "Even if a 1-year-old child can become a superhero, you'll never have that chance. Using the ultimate biological project, I can master extraordinary powers and create a powerful force. I don't need anyone's recognition," Killian retorted coldly. Jillian retorted coldly. He put down the goblet and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "I know that the appearance of the so-called Son of God, Caesar, has ignited a glimmer of hope in your heart and made Stark Industries seem to have a firm foothold. But without a real product release, Stark Industries will always be on the edge of a cliff. You don't think that a 1-year-old child can really replace Tony Stark, do you?" Potts lowered his head and didn't speak. After following Tony for so long, he had seen countless geniuses and scientists. But he really couldn't find anyone who could compete with Tony in the field of science and technology manufacturing. Dr. Bana could be considered half a genius, but he was a scientist in the field of biology. "Boss, something bad has happened." At this moment, a bodyguard pushed the door open and rushed into the hall, causing Killian, who had just drunk a mouthful of red wine, to choke. "What's the matter? Why are you shouting?" Killian took out a towel and wiped his mouth, glaring at the bodyguard. The bodyguard didn't care about being scolded and quickly reported, "Boss, Stark Industries really released a new product. Just 5 minutes ago, it was pre-sold on the official website." "What did you say?" Killian's eyes widened in shock. He didn't have the mood to pay attention to pots anymore. He jumped up from the chair, grabbed the bodyguard's hand and hurriedly said, "Let's go, take me to see it." The bodyguard immediately took Killian to the basement. As soon as they entered the room, Killian waved his hand and shooed away the researchers on the computer chair. He sat down and operated the mouse to open the official website of Stark Industries. As soon as he entered the official website, he saw a colorful layout that occupied the entire computer screen. It was really the promotion and introduction of the new product. The titles that greeted his eyes were simple and crude frowny-face social games, virtual reality, Skynet. Although this is a game, it's not a joke. Game. Stark Industries has been reduced to making games? Sure enough, it's a boring child's trick. Killian smiled and scrolled down with the mouse to continue browsing the content of the introduction below. In the middle, there was a paragraph of questions that stunned Killian. He couldn't help but read it softly. Are you disappointed with reality and want to have a new life experience? Are you not willing to be mediocre and want to become a star in the eyes of millions? Are you imprisoned by your environment and want to experience the fantasy world and the universe as you wish? In Skynet, you can get everything and start a new game life with equality and freedom. It had to be said that Killian was a little tempted by these questions. However, following the enemy's position, he snorted and said, "No matter how well you say it, it's not just a game." Scrolling down the page, there was a short video about a product introduction. Killian clicked to play it. A three-dimensional product model in the style of a technological helmet appeared in the video. It rotated 360 degrees and was accompanied by a cold mechanical voice explanation. On this day in 2009, Stark Industries made a breakthrough in the human body, information, and other advanced technology. They created a holographic VR helmet that can transmit the 5 senses of the human body and simulate hormones. Through this holographic VR helmet, players can go online and connect to the virtual world, Skynet. They can break free from the human body and arrive in a new world to experience. Virtual world, is this really just a game? Killian's hands trembled slightly. He had a bad feeling in his heart. He scrolled down to the bottom of the page. It was about the pre-sale of the holographic VR helmet. The pre-sale price was $5,000. This price in the current era was enough to buy a good car. Furthermore, Skynet was only available to the New York City area for the time being. However, the number of pre-sales of the holographic VR helmet had exceeded 100,000 people in less than 10 minutes after it was released. The number was still increasing rapidly. Chapter 370. On the outskirts of New York, in a retro villa hidden in a birch forest. Creak. 2 bodyguards wearing sunglasses pushed open the door and entered, holding 2 well-packaged square boxes in their hands. The cover had the manufacturing logo of Stark Industries and a series of small printed explanations in English. As soon as they walked into the hall and took off their coats, one of them rushed to Jillian, who was sitting in the hall, and reported loudly, "Boss, we finally bought it back. We got 2 in total." "What took you so long?" "It's been almost half a day." Jillian's face was gloomy and uncertain. He looked at the 2 of them coldly, and his gaze subconsciously shifted to the product's outer packaging. "So don't mention it." The leading bodyguard sighed, wiped the hot sweat on his forehead, and put the box on the table. He explained with grievance, "Boss, you didn't go to the downtown area of New York, especially the main road to Stark Industries. Pedestrians and vehicles almost jammed the streets and roads, and people fanatically lined up for thousands of meters like crazy just to buy this holographic VR helmet." The other bodyguard seconded, "Yes, we got these 2 things plus $2,000 from a scalper. I heard that not only in New York but also in nearby cities and other countries, many people came to New York specifically to try this Skynet game, which is known as the cross-century platform. The whole of New York is boiling. If you go out now, no matter who it is, they are talking about Skynet and holographic VR." The 2 bodyguards talked to each other, and their words were full of curiosity and excitement. The more they talked, the more excited they became. When they noticed that Jillian's face next to them was getting more and more ugly, they tactfully shut their mouths. "Correct your attitude. I don't believe that a mere kid in 3 or 4 days can make a cross-era technology product from nothing and directly put it into mass production and sale operation." Jillian reprimanded them, pointed to a box, and motioned to a bodyguard, "You, take it to the research room in the basement and let the staff disassemble and scan it." "Disassemble?" The bodyguard heard this, and his tone was full of reluctance and regret. "What, do you still want to play?" Jillian raised his head, his anger on the verge of exploding. I'll go right now. The bodyguard shivered, picked up a box with both hands and ran to the basement. Only then did Jillian's expression soften a little. Looking at the boxes on the table, he raised his chin and ordered the remaining bodyguard, "Open them." "Okay, boss." The bodyguard moved quickly. He took out a folding knife from his trouser pocket and tore open the box, revealing a black gold helmet-like object. The holographic VR helmet was made of aluminum and tempered glass. It was a semicircular arc that looked like an assembly line with a strong sense of craftsmanship. It looked very high-tech and fashionable, and it shone with a faint cool light under the light. No matter how demanding Jillian was, he could not help but secretly praise it. At the very least, from the looks of it, it seemed to be worth the money. "How do I operate it? Do I just have to put it on?" Jillian asked. The bodyguard held the instruction manual in his hand and said while reading, "Boss, it's written here. Currently, Skynet only covers New York City. As long as you're anywhere in New York, connect the holographic VR helmet to the power source, put it on your head and say the start connection command. You can connect and log into Skynet." Jillian waved at the blonde beauty not far away. Immediately, two beautiful women came forward and connected the holographic VR helmet to the power source for him. After the holographic VR helmet's green light lit up, Jillian was about to put it on when the bodyguard suddenly reminded him in a hurry, "Boss. When you enter Skynet for the first time through the holographic VR helmet, there will be a scan of the user's body. The user needs to go through the real name authentication of the ID number to register for a lifetime-only Skynet account." "Do you think I only have one identity?" Jillian snorted coldly. Without pausing, he put the VR helmet on his head with both hands and leaned back on the leather chair. Start connection. After registering a Skynet account with a fake identity and creating a customized character, Jillian's consciousness was transferred to a mysterious and unknown place. At first, it was silent. His vision was full of dazzling light. Gradually, a lot of noise entered his ears. Soon, he could even vaguely see a blurry and strange figure flashing in front of him. Jillian subconsciously rubbed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was stunned on the spot. In the real world, his body was still lying on the chair in the villa's hall. But at this moment, he was clearly in another vast and boundless place. Behind him was a gigantic pillar of light as tall as a skyscraper. Shadows constantly flickered from within. Then, strange giants, orcs, aliens, beautiful elves from movies, celebrities, stunning beauties, and even some anime characters appeared. These were all avatars that the players had carefully selected to create. Jillian looked out and saw transparent rainbow bridges connecting in all directions. Below them were lawn fountains, paradise gardens, and tropical grasslands. In the sky, there was a bright galaxy and an upside-down sea. On the other side of the rainbow bridges, there was a pyramid civilization, a floating fortress, a futuristic city, and a space fortress battleship that had appeared in movies before. Fairy tales, myths, and two-dimensional fantasy elements blended into one, flashing with a brilliant shimmer. Looking at it, there were scenes and things that should only exist in dreams. "Sir, don't block the way." A one-eyed man accidentally bumped into Jillian's shoulder, turned around and said, and ran excitedly toward a rainbow bridge. "There's no pain. This is indeed a virtual space. But this is too real." Jillian steadied himself in shock and looked down at his hands. The character he created was a tall and strong man. His appearance were not far from a bodyguard in reality. A voice behind him seemed to answer him. It came closer and said, "Yes, it's too real." Although Stark Industries claimed that the first-generation holographic VR helmet only released 70% of the simulation. Jillian turned around and saw that it was a punk-style youth who was ruining things. The punk youth also looked at him and said with a familiar smile, "Hello, I'm Z. Of course this is just a game name. No one wants to talk about reality on Skynet." "Elaine," Jillian replied coldly. Z laughed and said, "Don't be like that, brother Elaine. I just registered and logged into Skynet. I'm a pure newbie. Do you want to form a team and get to know it?" Jillian thought for a moment and nodded. "Sure. Then come with me." I couldn't resist just reading the manual. There are a few places in particular that I want to take a look at first. Z reached out and pulled out a floating window awkwardly. He invited Elaine to form a team and open the navigation map option. "What places?" Jillian suddenly regretted entering without reading the manual. Now he was a newbie who didn't even know how to operate it. "Didn't you read the detailed introduction of Skynet on the official website?" Z waved his hands excitedly. "Other than the dating platform in the leisure area, the creator Caesar created two special areas for Skynet to play. One is the World War II battlefield for shooting and strategy enthusiasts. The second is a virtual city based on New York, Gotham City. That you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.